My husband secretly had a second family. I found out in the worst way. I always thought my husband, Mark, was a good man. We had been married for 12 years, built a life together, and had two beautiful kids. He was caring, hardworking, and, as far as I knew, honest. But I was wrong. So terribly wrong. It all started on a cold Friday evening. Mark had left on another business trip like he did every other month. I never questioned it. He worked in finance, and travel was just part of the job. But that night, my world shattered. I was making dinner for the kids when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Your husband is not who you think he is. Check the address below. My heart pounded as I read the address. It was in a part of town I had never been to. My first instinct was to ignore it. Probably a scam, right? But something gnawed at me, a gut feeling I couldn't shake. So, after putting the kids to bed, I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed the address. When I arrived, my stomach twisted. It was a charming little house, warmly lit, with a car that looked suspiciously like Mark's parked in the driveway. I crept closer, feeling my heart race. Then I saw them. Through the window, there was Mark. My Mark, laughing, holding a little boy on his lap. A woman sat beside him, her hand on his. A family. His family. I felt like I was going to be sick. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone, snapping a picture as proof that this nightmare was real. I wanted to scream, to storm in and confront him, but my legs were frozen. That's when the worst part happened. The little boy, no older than 5, looked up at Mark and said, "Daddy, will you stay for my birthday tomorrow?" Daddy. The word hit me like a knife to the chest. Mark kissed the boy's forehead and said, "Of course, buddy." I wouldn't miss it for the world. That's when the woman turned to him and smiled. "You promise this time?" She asked softly. "I promise," he said. I choked back a sob. My husband, the man I trusted, the man I had children with, was living a double life. And he had just promised to be there for his other son's birthday. Meanwhile, our own daughter's birthday last month, he had missed it because of a business trip. Rage burned inside me, stronger than the heartbreak. I refused to be quiet. I refused to be played for a fool. I took one last deep breath, squared my shoulders, and rang the doorbell. The moment Mark saw me standing there, his face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "Surprise," I said, my voice ice cold. And just like that, his carefully built world came crashing down. Mark stood frozen in the doorway, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The woman, his other wife, his mistress, glanced between us, her brows knitting in confusion. The little boy clung to Mark's leg, unaware that his innocent words had just detonated a bomb. "Who is she?" the woman finally asked, stepping closer to Mark. I laughed, but it came out hollow, shaking. "Go ahead, Mark. Tell her who I am." His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Rachel, I can explain." "Explain?" My voice cracked. I could barely feel my own legs. My pulse roared in my ears, and I was vaguely aware that my hands were shaking. "Explain what, exactly?" "That you have a whole other family? That you've been lying to me? To us? For God knows how long?" The woman's face paled. "Wait, what?" I turned to her. "You didn't know either, did you?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Of course you didn't." Mark held up his hands, panic in his eyes. "Please, let me—" "No!" I took a step forward, shoving my phone in his face. The picture I had just taken of him with his other family was still on the screen. "You're a liar, a cheater, and that—" I pointed at the little boy, whose big blue eyes reminded me too much of my own son's. "That is proof that our entire marriage has been a lie." The woman, whose name I still didn't know, staggered backward, gripping the doorframe. "You're his wife?" My chest heaved. "For 12 years. She gasped, her own realization hitting her like a slap. She turned to Mark, fury rising in her eyes. Mark, what the hell is she talking about? But Mark couldn't answer. He just stood there, guilt carved into every feature of his face. How long? I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. He hesitated, and that hesitation alone was an answer. How long? I screamed, not caring if the whole neighborhood heard. Mark squeezed his eyes shut. 6 years. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. 6 years. 6 years of stolen weekends, of missed birthdays, of business trips. The woman, who had been just as deceived as me, let out a broken sob. Oh my God. She clutched her chest. We have been together for 6 years, Mark. I thought... She trailed off, her face crumbling as the horror of it all sank in. We had been living in parallel worlds, loving the same man, believing the same lies. A sick realization hit me. Do you know about me? I asked her, though I already knew the answer. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Number he told me he was divorced. I almost laughed. Of course he did. Mark finally spoke, his voice weak. I never meant to hurt either of you. I snapped my head toward him. Never meant to hurt us? I took a step closer, my rage blinding. You have 2 wives, 2 families, 2 entire lives built on nothing but lies. Do you know what you've done? He reached for me, but I jerked away. Don't touch me. A long silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. The other woman, who was now just as much a victim as I was, turned to me with glossy eyes. Her voice cracked. I didn't know, I swear I didn't know. I nodded stiffly. I believe you. Another beat of silence. And then I made a decision. I don't care what you do, I told Mark coldly. You can stay here. You can try to clean up this mess, but you will be hearing from my lawyer. And don't ever come near me or the kids again. Mark's eyes widened. Rachel. But I was already turning away, walking back toward my car. My legs felt like lead, my heart like a dead weight in my chest. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew one thing for certain. I was done with Mark. And he had just lost everything. I never thought I'd be here. Sitting in my lawyer's office, signing the final divorce papers, my hands were steady. My heart? Not so much. That's the last one, my lawyer, Ms. Cartwright, said as she gathered the papers into a neat stack. Once the judge finalizes everything, Mark will have no legal claim to you or the kids. You'll have full custody. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Full custody. No shared weekends, no visitation, nothing. Mark had barely even fought me on it. Not because he was noble, but because he knew he had no ground to stand on. He had 2 children with me, and 1 with her. Her? Sarah, that was her name. The other woman. At first, we had no reason to speak. I hated her by association, but over time, I realized she was just as much a victim as I was. She had been lied to, manipulated. She thought Mark was hers alone, just as I had. One night, about a month after the truth had exploded in our faces, she reached out to me. I was hesitant, but I answered. And then, to my surprise, we talked. For hours. About the lies he told us, the excuses he made, the way he had compartmentalized us like 2 separate TV shows he could flip between. Sarah was done with him too. Apparently, the moment I showed up on her doorstep, everything clicked for her. All the business trips, the vague explanations, the way he never introduced her to his coworkers or let her post about their relationship online. We weren't enemies. We were survivors. 3 weeks ago, Mark called me. He hadn't tried to see the kids, hadn't begged for another chance. He had simply vanished into whatever miserable corner of existence he now occupied. But that night, I guess the weight of his choices finally hit him. Rachel, he said, his voice hoarse. I don't even know where to start. I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch, let him sit in it. I lost everything. He finally whispered. I closed my eyes. You threw everything away, Mark. He let out a shaky breath. I know, and I'm sorry. I wake up every day and I don't even recognize my own life. My son, his voice cracked. Sarah won't let me see him. That's between you and her, I said flatly. And you? He asked, desperate. Is there any chance? I laughed bitterly. Mark, I didn't just lose a husband. I lost the illusion of one. The man I thought I married never existed. You were a stranger to me the entire time. He started to say something, but I wasn't done. Do you know what it's like to look back at 12 years and realize they were built on a lie? My voice trembled. To realize that the love you thought was real was actually shared with someone else? I never meant to. Don't, I snapped. Don't say you never meant to hurt me. You chose this over and over again. Every lie you told, every weekend you left us, every moment you spent with her and your other son instead of us. That was a choice. You meant for me never to find out. But you never cared about what would happen if I did. Silence. You're right, he whispered. I don't deserve forgiveness. No, I agreed. You don't. And then I hung up. Now, as I stepped out of my lawyer's office, I inhaled deeply. The divorce was final. My new life had begun. I wasn't naive. I knew there would still be hard days, but I was free. Sarah and I kept in touch, mostly for the sake of our kids, who were half-siblings now, whether we liked it or not. She was rebuilding her life, too. As for Mark, I didn't know. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. Because I was finally done looking back. I was only looking forward. The sun was setting as I sat on the back porch, watching my kids play in the yard. Laughter echoed in the air, and for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. It had been a long year, a painful year. After the divorce, I went through every stage of grief. Denial, anger, sadness. But somewhere along the way, I found something I never expected. Freedom. No more checking the clock, wondering when Mark would come home. No more questioning his stories, feeling the nagging doubt that I had ignored for far too long. I had built a new life, one where I was no longer the woman who got cheated on. I was just Rachel. Mother, friend, businesswoman. Yes, businesswoman. After years of putting my dreams on hold to support Mark, I finally started my own interior design business. I had always loved decorating, turning empty spaces into something beautiful. Now, I did it for clients. And for myself. And then there was him. I glanced toward the grill, where a man stood flipping burgers, his strong arms flexing as he worked. James. We met 6 months ago when I redesigned his law office. He was patient, kind, and most importantly, honest. He knew my story. Hell, the whole town knew my story. But he never treated me like a broken woman. He treated me like someone who deserved happiness. A little voice interrupted my thoughts. Mommy, my daughter Emily ran up to me beaming. Can we have ice cream after dinner? I smiled, brushing her hair back. If you eat all your veggies first. She groaned but grinned, running back to her brother. James walked over, handing me a glass of wine. You okay? He asked, his eyes searching mine. I nodded. More than okay. He sat beside me and I leaned into him, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. I wasn't bitter anymore. I didn't hate Mark. I didn't spend my nights thinking about what I had lost. Because I hadn't lost anything. I had gained everything. Mark sat in a dingy apartment, staring at the stack of overdue bills on the counter. His life had unraveled fast. After the truth came out, his job let him go. Not because of the affair, but because of the lies. His finances crumbled, his reputation was ruined, and worst of all, he was alone. Sarah had moved on too. She let him see their son occasionally, but there was no warmth between them anymore. And Rachel? He had seen her once, walking through town with him. Some guy. Tall, strong, with his arm protectively around her. She was smiling. And that's when it hit him. He hadn't just lost her. He had lost the best thing that had ever happened to him, and he would never get it back. I never thought I'd see Mark again. Not after everything that happened. Not after I rebuilt my life. Not after I found real happiness. But life had a way of throwing surprises my way. It happened on a warm Saturday afternoon. James and I were walking hand in hand through the park with the kids, enjoying the fresh air. Emily and Jake ran ahead, laughing as they chased each other, while James held a picnic basket, smiling at me like I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. And then I saw him. Mark. He was sitting on a worn-out bench, looking older, exhausted. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair slightly overgrown, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a ghost of the man I used to know. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he stood up and walked toward me. James noticed and instinctively tightened his grip on my hand. "You want me to handle this?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "Number, I've got this." Mark stopped a few feet away, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Rachel," he said, his voice rough. "Can we talk?" James stayed beside me, his presence a silent show of support. I exhaled. "What is there to talk about, Mark?" He hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the kids. I just wanted to see them." I crossed my arms. "You had a chance to be in their lives. You threw it away." His face twisted in pain. "I know, and I regret it. Every single day." I studied him. I had spent so long hating this man, resenting him for what he did to me, to our family. But standing here now, I didn't feel hate anymore. I just felt nothing. And that, more than anything, proved that I had moved on. Mark sighed, running a hand over his face. "I lost everything, Rachel. I lost you, Sarah, my kids, my job, my house." He looked down at the ground. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. "That's always how it works, isn't it?" I said softly. He nodded, shame in his eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want to do better. I want to be in their lives. If you'll let me." I glanced at James, who simply waited for my decision, trusting me to make the right one. Then I looked at my kids, running through the grass, happy, loved, safe. They didn't need Mark, but maybe, just maybe, he needed them. I met his eyes. "You don't get to walk back into their lives just because you feel guilty, Mark. If you want to see them, you earn it. You prove to me and to them that you can be a good father. No more disappearing. No more excuses. You show up or you stay gone. Got it?" Hope flickered in his eyes. "I got it." I nodded. "Then we'll see." Mark gave me a small, grateful smile. Then he looked at James, really looking at him for the first time. "You're taking good care of them, aren't you?" James met his gaze, his voice steady. "Always." Mark gave a sad, resigned nod. "Then I guess you're a better man than I ever was." And with that, he walked away. I watched him go, not with sadness, not with regret, just with the quiet certainty that I had finally closed that chapter of my life. James squeezed my hand. "You okay?" I turned to him, smiling. "More than okay." And as I watched my kids laugh in the sunlight, I knew one thing for certain. I had won. I had truly moved on. And nothing, not even Mark's regret, could take that away from me. I didn't expect Mark to keep his word. But to my surprise, he did. At first, it was just small things. An occasional text asking about the kids, a birthday card in the mail. I ignored most of it, unsure if he was truly trying or if this was just another performance. Then, one Saturday morning, my phone buzzed. "Mark, I'd like to see Emily and Jake, just for a few hours, if you'll let me." I stared at the message for a long time. I had already set my boundaries. I had told him he had to earn this. So I made a decision. Me. Meet us at the park at 3 p.m. No promises after that. At 3 p.m. sharp, I arrived at the park with the kids. James had offered to come, but I told him I needed to do this alone. Not because I didn't trust him, but because this was something I needed to see through. Mark was already there, sitting on a bench, hands nervously clasped together. He looked better, cleaner, put together, like a man desperately trying to rebuild himself. Emily and Jake spotted him before I could say anything. "Is that Dad?" Jake asked hesitantly. I crouched down to their level. "Yes, it is," I said carefully. "He asked to see you, but only if you want to." Emily bit her lip, looking at her brother. Jake thought for a moment, then nodded. "I want to talk to him." "Me too," Emily whispered. I stood up. "Okay, I'll be right here." The kids walked over slowly, and I stayed at a safe distance, watching. Mark knelt down to their level. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language spoke volumes. He looked humbled, ashamed, different. Then Jake suddenly hugged him. Emily hesitated, then joined. A lump formed in my throat. I wasn't sure if I had made the right decision, but seeing them together, seeing the cautious hope in my children's eyes, I knew this moment wasn't about me. It was about them. Later that evening, after the visit ended, Mark and I stood near my car while the kids ran ahead. "I appreciate this, Rachel," he said quietly. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm trying." I nodded. "Keep trying." Mark hesitated, then sighed. "There's something else I need to tell you." I crossed my arms. "What?" He ran a hand through his hair. "It's about Sarah." I stiffened. "What about her?" His face darkened. "She's been digging into everything. She reached out to my old job, even contacted my parents. She's convinced I'm hiding something." I frowned. "Why would she do that? I thought she moved on." Mark shook his head. "She said she did, but lately, I don't know. She's different, she's angry, and I think she blames you." I blinked. "Me?" He nodded. "She thinks if you hadn't shown up that day, everything would have stayed the same, that she wouldn't have lost me." I let out a cold laugh. "She didn't lose you, Mark. You lost yourself." "I know," he admitted. "But I wanted to warn you. I don't know what she's planning, but I don't think she's done with this." A chill ran down my spine. I had finally put the past behind me. But maybe, just maybe, the past wasn't done with me. I should have known Sarah wouldn't let things go. At first, it was small. A friend mentioned seeing her around my neighborhood. Then I got strange phone calls, silent ones, where the caller just breathed into the line before hanging up. Then, one night, I found a note taped to my car. "You took everything from me. Now it's my turn." My blood ran cold. I rushed inside, locked the doors, and called James. "She's watching me," I whispered, gripping the phone. "I'm on my way," he said immediately. "Call the police." I did. But by the time they arrived, she was gone. The next few days were tense. I kept my kids close, triple-checked the locks, and made sure someone was always with me. But I never expected what happened next. It was a quiet Saturday night. James and I had just put the kids to bed. I was sipping tea in the kitchen when I heard something outside. A soft scraping sound. My stomach twisted. James saw the look on my face and immediately went to check. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. I followed, my heart pounding. That's when we saw it. Spray painted across my front door in jagged, angry letters. Liar, thief, homewrecker. And standing in the driveway, breathing hard, her eyes wild with rage. Sarah. Her blonde hair was a tangled mess, her face flushed with fury. In her shaking hands, she held something that made my blood freeze. A knife. "You ruined my life," she hissed, pointing it at me. "You took everything from me." James stepped in front of me, his voice calm but firm. "Sarah, put the knife down. This isn't the way." She laughed, an unhinged, hollow sound. "Not the way." Her gaze snapped to me. What was I supposed to do, Rachel? Just sit back and watch as you moved on? As you got the happy ending I was supposed to have? I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Sarah, I didn't take anything from you. Mark did this. He lied to both of us. Her face twisted. No, he loved me. He chose me. But then you showed up and everything fell apart. She took a shaky step forward. James subtly shifted his weight, preparing to act. I needed to stop this before it got worse. Sarah, I said carefully, keeping my voice steady. Listen to me. You're hurt, you're angry, but this isn't the answer. Hurting me won't change what happened. It won't bring back the life you lost. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't have a life anymore. But you can, I pleaded. You can walk away right now, before it's too late. For a second, something flickered in her expression. Doubt. Then, put the knife down, now! Police sirens wailed as officers swarmed onto the street, their guns drawn. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. She looked at me, then at the police, then back at the knife in her hands. And then, as if something inside her shattered, she let it clatter to the ground. Within seconds, they had her in handcuffs. As they led her away, she turned back one last time. This isn't over, she whispered. But I knew, deep in my heart, it was. Sarah was charged with harassment and attempted assault. The judge ordered a restraining order, and I never saw her again. Mark? He vanished after that. Maybe he was too ashamed. Maybe he finally realized there was nothing left for him here. And me? I moved on. For real this time. James and I got married a year later in a small, quiet ceremony with the people who truly mattered. My kids grew up in a home full of love, not lies. And as I stood on my porch one evening, watching the sun set over the life I had rebuilt, I smiled. Because I had survived. Because I had won. Because I was finally, truly free. My dog led me to a huge secret in my basement. I always thought my golden retriever, Max, was just a regular dog. A little too energetic, maybe, but nothing out of the ordinary. That changed the night he wouldn't stop scratching at the basement door. It started around 11 p.m. I was watching TV when Max ran to the basement door, whining and scratching. At first, I ignored him, assuming he just wanted to chase a mouse or something. But when he started barking, deep, urgent barks, I knew something was wrong. "What's up, buddy?" I asked, ruffling his fur. But he didn't calm down. His ears were perked, his tail stiff. I had never seen him act like this before. Curious, I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. The basement was dark and musty, the old wooden stairs creaking under my weight. Max rushed ahead, sniffing wildly. I had lived in this house for 2 years, and aside from storing holiday decorations and some old furniture, I never had much reason to come down here. But as I followed Max, my flashlight flickered across something strange on the floor. A square outline, like a hidden trapdoor. Max whined and pawed at it. A trapdoor? I had never noticed it before. My heart pounded as I knelt and pushed against the wooden panel. It didn't budge. Running my hands along the edges, I found a small, rusted metal handle. I yanked on it, and with a groan, the door swung open, revealing a ladder leading into darkness. Max barked excitedly. "There's no way I'm going down there," I muttered. But Max had already made up his mind. He leaped into the hole, landing with a soft thud below. "Max," I hissed. No response. I sighed. If my dog was willing to risk it, I had to follow. I took a deep breath and climbed down. The air was cold, damp. My flashlight flickered as I reached the bottom. I expected a dirt floor, maybe some pipes, but instead I found myself in a narrow tunnel made of old bricks. The walls were lined with torches, unlit but still hanging there as if someone had been here recently. I shivered. Max was ahead, sniffing around a wooden crate covered in cobwebs. I stepped closer, brushing away the dust. Carved into the wood was a single word: Holloway. My last name. I froze. What was my family's name doing down here? Hands shaking, I pried the crate open. Inside were stacks of old documents, yellowed and fragile. Some were letters, some looked like blueprints. As I scanned the papers, a name kept appearing: Elias Holloway, my great-great-grandfather. I had heard stories about him. He was a banker in the 1800s, rumored to have hidden a fortune before mysteriously disappearing. The family had always assumed it was just a myth. But here, buried beneath my house, were pages of ledgers and maps, and at the very bottom of the crate, something wrapped in cloth. I unwrapped it, revealing a small, rusted key. Max wagged his tail. "A key to what, buddy?" I whispered. Then I saw it. A door at the end of the tunnel, partially hidden behind bricks. And I knew. This was just the beginning. I stared at the hidden door, my heart hammering. The key in my hand felt heavy, like it was meant to open something important. Max sat beside me, wagging his tail as if urging me forward. Swallowing hard, I approached the door. The bricks around it were old, crumbling, as if they'd been placed there in a hurry. I brushed away some loose debris, revealing a keyhole in the rusted metal handle. My fingers trembled as I slid the key in. It fit. With a deep breath, I turned it. The lock gave way, and with a creak, the door slowly swung open. A rush of stale air hit me, carrying the scent of damp earth and something metallic. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating what lay beyond. My breath caught. It was a small underground chamber. In the center, an old wooden chest sat atop a stone pedestal. Thick iron reinforcements lined the edges, and the lid was secured with a heavy latch. On the walls, faded paintings and strange symbols covered the brick. Max whined, sniffing the air. I hesitated. My great-great-grandfather, Elias Holloway, had hidden something down here. But what? Treasure? Documents? Some dark family secret? With shaking hands, I stepped forward and lifted the latch. The lid groaned as it opened. Inside, I saw stacks of neatly arranged leather-bound books, each marked with Elias's initials. Beneath them, wrapped in cloth, was a large velvet pouch. My pulse quickened as I picked it up and untied the string. Gold coins spilled into my palm. I let out a breathless laugh. Was this Elias's hidden fortune? Had my family been living above a buried treasure for generations? Max barked, startling me. His ears were perked, and he was staring at something behind me. I turned slowly. In the doorway, a shadow moved. For a split second, I thought it was a trick of the light. Then I saw the glint of eyes. Someone was there, watching. I grabbed Max's collar, my mind racing. Had someone else known about this all along? Then, footsteps, coming closer. I wasn't alone down here. Max growled, his fur bristling as the shadowy figure stepped closer. My grip tightened on the bag of gold coins, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice more unsteady than I wanted it to be. No answer. The flashlight in my hand flickered, casting eerie shadows against the damp walls. Then, another step. The figure emerged from the darkness, and my breath hitched. It was an old man. His face was gaunt, his skin pale and wrinkled, like he had spent years underground. His eyes locked onto mine with an unsettling intensity. "You shouldn't have come down here," he rasped. His voice was dry, like paper crumbling. I took an instinctive step back, Max pressing against my leg. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at the open chest, at the gold, and then back at me. His expression darkened. "This isn't yours," he said. "It was never meant to be found." I swallowed hard. This was hidden by my ancestor, Elias Holloway. This belongs to my family. A strange chuckle escaped the old man's lips. "Elias Holloway," he murmured, shaking his head. "That man, He doomed us all. Chills crawled up my spine. What do you mean? The old man took a slow step forward. He wasn't just hiding gold, he said. He was hiding something much worse. And now, you've woken it up. Before I could respond, the ground beneath us rumbled. A deep guttural sound echoed from somewhere within the tunnel, like something ancient shifting in the darkness. Max barked wildly, his tail tucked between his legs. The old man's eyes widened in horror. It's too late, he whispered. Then the torches on the walls, torches I thought were long dead, sputtered to life. A gust of warm, foul-smelling air rushed through the chamber, and the walls trembled as dust and debris rained from above. Something was coming. Run, the old man shouted. But before I could move, a massive inhuman hand, clawed and covered in decaying flesh, burst through the tunnel wall. And then I saw it. A monstrous figure, its hollow eyes glowing in the flickering torchlight, crawling out from the darkness. Max whimpered. My body froze. The secret in my basement wasn't gold. It wasn't treasure. It was a nightmare. The monstrous figure dragged itself through the crumbling tunnel wall, its hollow eyes glowing like embers. Its body was twisted and grotesque, long skeletal limbs covered in patches of rotting flesh. The stench of decay filled the chamber, making my stomach turn. Max barked furiously, standing his ground despite the sheer terror radiating from the creature. The old man, his face pale with fear, backed away. You should have never opened the chest, he muttered. I barely heard him. My legs felt like lead, my breathing shallow. Then the thing moved. It let out a deep, guttural growl that rattled my bones. Its clawed hand stretched toward me. I stumbled back, my foot catching on the chest. My flashlight slipped from my grip and clattered to the floor, the beam spinning wildly across the chamber. Max lunged forward. He snapped at the creature, his teeth flashing in the dim light. No, I shouted, grabbing at his collar. But it was too late. The thing swiped at him, barely missing as Max darted back with a snarl. The old man yanked me by the arm. We have to go, now! I didn't hesitate. Scooping up the flashlight, I sprinted toward the tunnel entrance, Max at my heels. The ground trembled beneath us as the creature let out a deafening roar. Dust and debris rained down as if the entire underground chamber was about to collapse. I ran blindly, following the old man's lead through the narrow tunnel. My lungs burned and my legs screamed in protest, but the only thing that mattered was getting out. Behind us, I heard the thing scraping against the walls, moving fast. Too fast. I risked a glance over my shoulder, just in time to see a long, clawed arm reaching out for me. No. I pushed myself harder, practically leaping up the basement ladder. Max was right beside me, his paws scrabbling against the wood. The old man followed, moving surprisingly fast for someone who looked like a walking corpse. The moment we reached the top, I threw my weight against the basement door, slamming it shut. The old man locked it with a rusted bolt I hadn't even noticed before. Then, silence. My heart pounded in my ears. Max pressed against my side, his body tense. The old man sagged against the wall, breathing heavily. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then I heard it. A slow, deliberate scratching from the other side of the door. The old man met my gaze, his expression grim. It won't stop, he said quietly. Not until it gets what it wants. My mouth was dry. What does it want? He exhaled shakily. Elias Holloway made a deal. He took the gold. But in return, he promised something else. I swallowed hard. What? The old man's eyes darkened. A soul. The scratching grew louder, and deep below us, something laughed. The laughter echoing from beneath us wasn't human. It was guttural, mocking, a sound that slithered into my bones and made my stomach churn. Max whimpered, pressing himself against my leg. The old man, whoever he was, stood frozen, his eyes locked on the basement door. The scratching had grown into slow, deliberate thuds, like the creature was knocking, trying to get out. I swallowed hard. You said Elias Holloway made a deal. My voice was barely above a whisper. A soul for gold. Whose soul? The old man turned to me, his face unreadable. Then he simply said, yours. A shiver ran down my spine. What? He took a deep breath. Elias tricked it. He never paid his debt. He sealed the creature down there and hid the key. But it always knew someone would come looking for the gold. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. You're saying this thing has been waiting for me? The old man nodded. The debt doesn't disappear. It just passes down. I could barely process what I was hearing. Some ancient monster had been trapped in my basement for over 100 years, waiting for someone, me, to break the seal. Another loud thud shook the door. This time the bolt rattled. We need to leave, the old man said, his voice urgent. Now. Max barked in agreement. I didn't argue. I turned, reaching for the basement stairs. Slam. The basement door exploded inward, wood and metal shattering as something massive forced its way through. I barely had time to react before I felt it. A freezing grip wrapping around my ankle. No, I screamed as I was yanked backward. My hands clawed at the wooden floor, but the force was too strong. Max lunged at the thing, teeth flashing, but it swatted him away like a rag doll. The old man grabbed my arms, pulling me with surprising strength. Fight it! Don't let it take you! I kicked wildly, my foot connecting with something that felt like ice-covered stone. The creature shrieked, an ear-splitting sound that rattled my skull. Then the old man did something I didn't expect. He spoke to it. The words were in a language I didn't recognize. Harsh, guttural sounds that seemed to vibrate in the air. The creature hissed, its grip faltering for a split second. That was all I needed. I wrenched free and scrambled to my feet. Max was already up, barking wildly. The old man grabbed my wrist and shoved something into my hand. A small vial filled with a dark, thick liquid. Pour this on it, he shouted. I didn't think. I just threw. The moment the liquid hit the creature's skin, it screamed. Its body convulsed, smoke rising as it thrashed in agony. The air grew thick, suffocating as the thing shrank back toward the basement. Go! The old man yelled. I grabbed Max and ran. We burst out of the house into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I reached the street. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath. Max pressed against me, shaking. The old man stood beside us, staring at the house. It was silent. Too silent. Then, the front door creaked open. And a voice, not human, not natural, whispered my name. Holloway. The old man turned to me, his expression grave. This isn't over, he said. And somehow, I already knew that. The whisper sent ice down my spine. Holloway. My last name, drawn out like a curse, like it had been waiting to be spoken for 100 years. Max growled low in his throat, his hackles raised as he stared at the open door. The old man placed a firm hand on my shoulder. We don't have much time. I turned to him, still gasping for breath. What the hell was that thing? He glanced back at the house, his eyes shadowed. Something that should have stayed buried. I shook my head. No more riddles. If that thing is after me, I need to know what it is. The old man hesitated, then let out a slow sigh. It's a collector, he said grimly. A being bound by ancient deals, old curses. Elias Holloway promised it something in exchange for wealth. He never fulfilled his end of the bargain. He turned to me, his expression serious. And now it believes you are the payment. A lump formed in my throat. How do we stop it? The old man rubbed his temples. We can't just kill it. It's bound to your bloodline. That thing has waited generations for someone to open that chest and break the seal. We need to bind it again, permanently. A gust of wind howled through the trees. From inside the house, the whispering grew louder. Come back. We can make a deal. I shuddered. What do we do? The old man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Aged, yellowed, covered in strange symbols. We need to trap it, just like Elias did. I hesitated. And if we fail? The old man's eyes darkened. Then it won't just take you. His voice dropped lower. It'll take everything. A deep growl from Max snapped me out of my thoughts. I followed his gaze, back to the house. The whispering had stopped. The front door stood wide open, the darkness inside stretching like an open maw. And then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming toward us. I clenched my fists. Let's end this. The old man nodded. Follow my lead. We stepped forward, back into the nightmare. Stepping back into the house felt like walking into the mouth of a beast. The air was thick, heavy, like the house itself was breathing. The old wooden floor creaked beneath our steps, and Max let out a low whimper, pressing close to my side. The whispering had stopped, but we weren't alone. The old man, who still hadn't told me his name, held up the paper covered in strange symbols. He whispered something under his breath, his fingers tracing the markings. Then, from the basement, a sound. A slow, dragging scrape. I swallowed hard. It knows we're here. The old man nodded. It's waiting. That made it worse. I forced my legs to move, step by step, until we reached the basement door. The wood was splintered, broken from when the creature had burst through. But now the doorway was whole again, like the house had repaired itself. I met the old man's gaze. That's not normal, right? He exhaled. Nothing about this is normal. A heavy silence hung between us. Then, with a slow, careful movement, the old man pressed his hand against the door. It swung open on its own. Darkness yawned below. A chill crawled up my spine. Something was waiting for me down there. Something that wanted my soul. Max barked once, the sound sharp and warning. The old man looked at me. Stay close. Whatever happens, don't run. That seemed like terrible advice, but I nodded. Together, we stepped inside. The basement was different. The stone walls that had once been crumbling were smooth now, blackened like charred bone. The ceiling stretched higher than before, disappearing into the shadows. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood and something metallic. Blood. Max whimpered, his ears flat against his head. Then I saw it. The thing was waiting for us. It stood in the center of the room, its body impossibly tall and twisted. Its skin, if you could call it that, looked like stretched leather, stitched together with something dark and pulsing. Its hollow eyes burned like dying embers, locked onto me. A slow grin spread across its face. You came back. The voice slithered into my mind like oil, thick and suffocating. I felt my breath hitch. My chest grew tight, my body suddenly heavy. The old man stepped forward, holding up the paper. We're here to bind you, he said firmly. Your deal with Elias Holloway is over. The thing laughed, a deep, guttural sound that made my stomach twist. No. And then, the lights went out. The darkness swallowed everything. I heard Max barking wildly, the old man muttering something, and then whispers, dozens of them, surrounding me. Holloway, you are ours. It is written. It is sealed. I felt something cold wrap around my wrist, pulling. I struggled, my breath coming in sharp gasps. Max! A burst of light exploded in the room. The old man had pressed his hand to the floor, the paper glowing with golden symbols. The whispers screamed in pain. The thing shrieked, lunging at me. Max leaped, sinking his teeth into its arm. The creature howled, its form flickering like a dying flame. The old man gritted his teeth. Now, boy, say its name. I didn't know how I knew it, but suddenly the name was there, in my head. I opened my mouth and screamed, Serac. The creature froze. A deafening boom shook the basement. The golden symbols exploded outward, wrapping around the thing like chains. It screeched, clawing at the air, its body shrinking, collapsing in on itself. The shadows peeled away, revealing bones, rotten, twisted, belonging to something not human. The last thing I saw before the basement swallowed it whole was its face twisting in rage. Then it was gone. The basement returned to normal. The air cleared. The walls crumbled back to their original decayed state. I collapsed onto my knees, gasping. Max pressed against me, licking my face, his tail wagging frantically. The old man let out a long breath. It's done. I looked up at him, my mind spinning. It's really gone? He hesitated. For now. I frowned. What do you mean, for now? He met my gaze, his expression unreadable. Curses like this, they don't just end. You stopped it, but as long as the Holloway bloodline exists. I didn't let him finish. You're saying it could come back? The old man nodded. Someday. I exhaled slowly, rubbing Max's ears. So what do I do now? The old man turned toward the basement steps. You prepare. Then, just like that, he was gone, leaving me alone in a house that was finally silent. No whispers, no scratching, no lurking thing waiting in the dark. Just me, Max, and a basement that held a secret I wished I'd never uncovered. The old man was gone. He had disappeared into the night, leaving me with more questions than answers. Who was he? How did he know about my family's past? And most importantly, had we really stopped it? Max let out a soft whine, nudging my hand. His tail was still tucked, his ears flicking toward the basement. He didn't trust it. And honestly, neither did I. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaky. The basement door was still open, revealing nothing but darkness below. I wanted to slam it shut, bolt it, and never set foot down there again. But something stopped me. Something felt wrong. A slow, sinking feeling crawled into my gut. I wasn't safe yet. I took a deep breath. Come on, Max, I whispered. And against all common sense, I went back down. The basement was exactly as we'd left it. Cold, dusty. The broken stone walls stretched into the shadows. There were no more eerie symbols, no lingering voices calling my name. But the chest, the damn chest that had started this nightmare, was still sitting in the middle of the room. Shut. Like it had never been opened. My stomach twisted. Max growled low in his throat, stepping protectively in front of me. I took a cautious step forward. My breath caught in my throat as I noticed something new. The floor was different. Carved into the stone beneath the chest were fresh markings. Not like the ones the old man had drawn. These were crude, rushed, like something had scratched them in a hurry. I knelt down, brushing dust away. My fingers trembled as I traced the letters. HELPMEA. Chill ran through my body. Someone, or something, had carved those words into the stone. And I had a terrible feeling that whatever we'd trapped down here, we hadn't trapped it alone. My breath hitched as I stared at the words carved into the stone. Help me. The letters looked frantic, uneven, desperate. Max let out a low whimper, his body pressed against my leg. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, to never come back. But then I heard it. A voice. Software weak. Human. Hello? My blood turned to ice. It came from the chest. I staggered back, my heart hammering. Number that wasn't possible. We had sealed it. The creature was gone, wasn't it? I took a shaky breath. Who's there? Silence, then, please don't leave me. The voice cracked, raw with pain. It didn't sound like a monster. It sounded like a person. I turned to Max, my hand hovering over the lid. My body screamed at me not to open it. But what if someone had been trapped down there? What if Elias Holloway had left more than just a debt behind? I hesitated. My fingers brushed the latch. Max snarled, lunging forward and snapping at my hand. I yelped, stumbling back. Max, what the hell? He stood over the chest, teeth bared, growling like I'd never seen before. Max, move. My voice shook. He didn't. His body was rigid, his fur bristling, his eyes weren't on me. They were locked on the chest. The voice inside changed. Please. I'm so hungry. The last word warped, twisting into something unnatural. I froze. Max let out a vicious bark, his stance unwavering. Then, ever so slowly, the chest moved. The lid didn't open, but something inside shifted. A single, muffled thud, like a hand pressing against the wood. I stumbled backward, my pulse hammering in my skull. My shaking fingers reached for the lighter in my pocket, the one I always carried but barely used. I flicked it open. A small, flickering flame danced in the dark. I met Max's eyes. He knew. So did I. Without another thought, I hurled the flame at the chest. Boom. The fire erupted instantly, swallowing the wood in a blaze of orange and red. The markings on the floor glowed, pulsing like veins as the flames licked higher. And then, it screamed. Not a human scream. Not a monster's. Something worse. The basement shook, the walls cracked. The shadows moved. I turned and ran. Max bolted up the stairs ahead of me, his paws scrambling against the wood. I barely made it through the door before the fire exploded outward, swallowing the basement in an inferno. I stumbled into the yard, gasping for breath as the heat roared behind me. The house shuddered. Then, with a sickening groan, collapsed. Flames shot into the night sky, embers dancing like fireflies. I fell to my knees, watching as the place that had held generations of secrets crumbled into nothing. Max pressed against me, his chest rising and falling in heavy pants. It was over. For real this time. At least, I thought it was. Then, from the burning wreckage, something moved. A shape. A shadow. It watched me. Not attacking, not speaking, just watching. And as the firelight flickered against its hollow eyes, I realized the truth. I hadn't destroyed it. I had set it free. I went on a date and found out they were my sibling. I met Alex on a dating app. We clicked instantly. Our banter was effortless, and we liked all the same things. Bad reality TV, deep dish pizza, and old school rock music. It felt like fate. So, after 2 weeks of texting nonstop, we decided to meet in person. The restaurant was a cozy Italian spot downtown. When I arrived, Alex was already there, sipping a glass of wine. They stood up, smiling. Hey, you made it. I sat across from them, feeling a weird mix of nerves and excitement. Of course, I've been looking forward to this all week. Dinner was amazing. We laughed about childhood stories. Turns out we both had a pet turtle growing up. We both loved road trips and swore by the rule that car snacks were more important than gas stops. There was even a strange coincidence. Both our moms called us their little explorer when we were kids. This is kind of crazy, Alex said, twirling their pasta. I don't think I've ever met someone I have so much in common with. I know, right? I chuckled. It's like we could be related. That's when it happened. Alex froze, mid-bite. Wait. Their smile faltered. Your mom's name is Linda, right? I blinked. Yeah. How do you know that? They set down their fork. Because my mom's name is Linda, too. A nervous laugh bubbled out of me. Oh, come on. That's just another coincidence. Alex's face had gone pale. And your dad? You said he left when you were little? Yeah, when I was 3. My stomach twisted. Why? Alex exhaled sharply, rubbing their temples. Mine left too. When I was 5. The restaurant blurred around me. No way. Alex reached for their phone, hands shaking. Do you have any pictures of him? I didn't. Mom had burned every single one. But I did remember his name. Daniel Carter. Alex visibly flinched. Their fingers hovered over their phone screen before turning it to me. A grainy, old photograph filled the screen of a man in his 20s grinning in front of a car. I recognized the car. It was the only thing I had left from my father, a rusted old Mustang sitting in my mom's garage. My heart slammed against my ribs. Oh my God. Alex pushed their chair back, looking equally horrified. We have the same dad. I felt like throwing up. This wasn't just some bad rom-com plot. This was real. My date, the person I'd been flirting with for weeks, was my half-sibling. We stared at each other in stunned silence. Then, at the same time, we both grabbed for the wine bottle and poured ourselves another glass. Well, Alex finally said, forcing a laugh, I guess we won't be going on a second date. Nope. I swallowed the wine in one gulp. Definitely not. The awkwardness sat between us like an overcooked pasta dish neither of us wanted to acknowledge. Alex was the first to break the silence. So, do we just pretend this never happened? Or do we, I don't know, exchange sibling bracelets or something? I let out a short, dry laugh. I think we're supposed to do the whole dramatic reunion thing. You know, hug, cry, maybe yell at our dad for being a dirtbag. Alex groaned. Great. I always wanted a long-lost sibling, just not like this. I wasn't sure how to feel. Just hours ago, I had been nervously excited about this date. Now, I was sitting across from my newly discovered half-sibling, trying to process the fact that we had almost kissed if this night had gone differently. I shuddered at the thought. Okay, first rule. We never speak of this again. Alex nodded. Agreed. The universe doesn't need to know how close we came to starring in our own messed-up soap opera. We both took another sip of wine. The initial horror was starting to settle into something else. Something strangely comforting. So, Alex said after a beat, twirling their empty glass, I guess we should talk about the elephant in the room. Our dad? I asked. Yeah. Have you ever tried looking for him? I shook my head. Number my mom made it clear he was the kind of guy who didn't stick around. I figured if he wanted to find me, he would. Alex sighed. Same. I used to be angry about it, but after a while, I just stopped thinking about him. We sat there for a moment, digesting everything. It was weird. Our dad had abandoned us both, but in some twisted way, he had accidentally reunited us. After another pause, I gave Alex a small smile. You know, if we hadn't met like this, I think we'd actually be great friends. They grinned. Right? I was literally thinking the same thing. Minus the whole almost dating disaster, I kind of like having you around. I smirked. Well, lucky you. You're stuck with me now. It's kind of a sibling rule. Alex groaned dramatically. Ugh, does this mean I have to buy you birthday presents? Absolutely. They rolled their eyes but laughed, and somehow the night didn't feel so disastrous anymore. By the time we left the restaurant, things didn't feel awkward anymore. We had walked in as almost lovers, but were leaving as something far stranger, and maybe even better, a family. Alex and I walked out of the restaurant together, still reeling from what had just happened. The cold night air hit my face, making everything feel even more surreal. So, do we just go home now and pretend this was some fever dream? I asked, half joking. Alex smirked. Tempting. But now that I know I have a sibling, I kind of want to know more. About you, about Mom, even about him. Him, of course, meant our father. The man who had disappeared from both of our lives without a trace. I hesitated. I had spent my whole life not caring about him, shoving any curiosity deep down. But now I had a sibling who had been left behind just like me. You know what? I said, taking a deep breath. Maybe we should find him. Alex raised an eyebrow. Seriously? I shrugged. If nothing else, I want answers. I want to know why he left. I want to know if he has more kids out there. Who knows? We might have a whole secret family. Alex let out a dramatic groan. Ugh, please no, I don't think I can handle another accidental sibling romance. I laughed. Fair point. But come on, don't you at least want to know? They exhaled, running a hand through their hair. Yeah, I do. And just like that, we made a pact. The next day, we met at a coffee shop, laptops open, ready to dig into the mystery of Daniel Carter. So, Alex said, typing furiously, did your mom ever mention where he went after he left? I shook my head. Nope. She never talked about him at all. Like, zero information. Alex sighed. Same, but I did some research last night. There's a guy named Daniel Carter who lived in our city about 20 years ago, but then he moved to Arizona. Think that could be him? Arizona? That was far. Only one way to find out, I said, clicking on a link. The page loaded, revealing a blurry photo from what looked like an old newspaper article. It was a local business spotlight from years ago, featuring a man who looked eerily familiar. Same dark eyes, same sharp jawline. Alex and I exchanged a look. That's him, they whispered. A chill ran down my spine. After all these years, we finally had a lead. Now the question was, what would we do with it? We sat there in stunned silence, staring at the blurry picture of Daniel Carter. The man in the photo didn't just look like our father. He was him. The dark eyes, the slight smirk, the messy hair. Every detail screamed familiarity. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a mix of excitement, anger, and disbelief. Alex was the first to speak. So, Arizona, huh? That's a long way to go just to dodge responsibility. I snorted, feeling a wave of frustration. Yeah, and how does someone just get to leave their kids and start fresh somewhere else? What kind of person does that? Alex leaned back in their chair, folding their arms. The kind who clearly doesn't deserve a reunion. That thought stung. I had spent so long convincing myself that my father didn't matter, that he was just some guy who didn't care enough to stick around. But now, knowing that he had moved on, built a life somewhere else, it made me angry in ways I hadn't expected. I don't know, I said, breaking the silence. I still want to meet him. Get some kind of closure. Alex shot me a look. Closure? From a guy who bailed out on us? Maybe. Or maybe I just need to hear him say it. Hear him admit he made a mistake. Alex hesitated, then nodded. I get that. But honestly, I think we're both going to have to come to terms with the fact that he's probably not the person we've imagined him to be. He might not even care about us. I didn't want to hear it, but I knew deep down that Alex was right. Our father might have left us once, but now, seeing him from a distance, this stranger who shared our blood, he might not even want to meet us. Arizona, I muttered. It's not that far. Maybe we could go visit him. The idea was ridiculous, but also somehow exhilarating. Alex raised an eyebrow. Wait, are you saying we should just show up on his doorstep? Well, we've got nothing to lose, right? I shrugged. I don't even know if he'll be there, but at least we'll know we tried. Alex stared at me for a moment and then, finally, smiled. You're a weird person. But okay, let's do it. Road trip to Arizona, find Dad, and maybe get some answers. But no weird sibling bonding after, all right? Agreed, I said, laughing despite the nervous energy coursing through me. We spent the next few days planning our trip. The more I thought about it, the more surreal it all became. A week ago, I had no idea that I had a sibling, let alone a father, to track down in Arizona. It felt like I was stepping into a different life entirely. On the day of our trip, Alex and I piled into my car, bags stuffed with snacks, maps, and all the stuff needed for a road trip. We left the city early, the sun barely rising over the horizon. The drive was filled with half-jokes and deep conversations, our bond growing with each mile. We talked about everything, our childhoods, what we'd imagined family to be, and what we hoped to find when we finally met our father. As the miles stretched on, I felt a sense of anticipation settle in my stomach. The closer we got to Arizona, the more the reality of our mission hit me. We were really going to do this. We finally arrived in the small town where our father supposedly lived. It felt strange. Everything was so normal. so suburban. A far cry from the chaotic, dysfunctional idea I had built in my mind about him. We found the address, parked in front of a modest house, and sat there for a while, unsure of what to do next. "Should we knock?" Alex asked. "Or just wait until he shows up at the door with a tray of cookies and says, 'I've been waiting for you two my whole life'?" I snorted. "You'd be the first person to faint if that happened." Alex chuckled. "True. But seriously, what's the plan here? We knock and say what?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I don't know. Hey, we're your kids. You left us and we've been looking for you for years." Simple enough, right? Alex gave me a look. "You sure you want to go in there and have that conversation?" Before I could respond, the door creaked open. A man stepped out, older now, his hair graying at the temples, but with the same face I had seen in that photograph. He looked at us, confused at first, and then his eyes widened. Who are you?" I felt the world stop. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. The moment I would find out if he was ready to answer for everything. I opened my mouth to speak, but Alex beat me to it. "We're your kids." The words hung in the air like an electric charge. We stood there, frozen, staring at the man who, by blood, was our father. His face went pale, and for a second he looked as though he might faint. Then his expression flickered between disbelief, guilt, and something else I couldn't quite place. You're my kids?" His voice cracked slightly, like he couldn't believe it. "Yeah," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "Daniel Carter, right? We've been looking for you." For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He just stood there, blinking at us as if we were some strange apparition. Then his eyes flicked over to me and Alex, pausing on our faces as if trying to process it all. I don't understand," he stammered. I didn't think I'd ever see either of you again." Alex crossed their arms, their voice tight. "Yeah, well, we've got questions. A lot of questions." My stomach twisted. This wasn't going how I imagined it would. I thought I'd have this big, dramatic moment, maybe some tears, maybe a fight. But instead, he just seemed lost. Can we come in?" I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. He nodded slowly, stepping aside to let us in. The house was small but cozy, one of those places that had clearly seen better days. There was a faint smell of old wood and faded books in the air. It felt like time had stopped here. We sat down in his living room, the tension thick as we waited for him to say something. After a while, Daniel finally spoke, his voice quieter now, as though he was choosing his words carefully. "I didn't know how to find you," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "Your mother, she made it clear I wasn't wanted in your lives. I thought you were better off without me." I couldn't hide the anger that flared up inside me. "You didn't even try to find us, did you? You just disappeared, left us to pick up the pieces." Alex shifted uncomfortably in their seat. "That's not good enough, Dad. You left us with nothing but questions. You think we could just move on from that?" Daniel looked down at his hands, his shoulders sagging. "I wasn't proud of what I did. But I was young. I made mistakes. And I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving." I almost laughed. "The right thing? By abandoning your kids?" He winced. "I thought it would be easier on all of us. Your mother and I? Things were bad between us. I thought I was just causing more harm by staying." "So you thought disappearing was the solution?" I shot back, frustration creeping into my voice. Alex gave me a nudge, urging me to calm down. "We just need to understand why. Why didn't you try to come back? Why didn't you ever reach out?" Daniel's eyes welled with tears, and for the first time I saw genuine regret in them. "I was scared. I didn't think you'd want anything to do with me. I failed you both. And now, I don't know if I can make it right." I swallowed hard. the weight of his words hitting me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't some heartless monster standing before us. It was a man who had lived with his choices, who had seen the consequences of his actions. Alex spoke softly, almost as if to themselves. "We don't know what to do with all this. You can't just show up after all this time and expect us to forget everything." I looked at Alex, then back at Daniel. This wasn't about forgiveness. Not yet. We needed time. But I couldn't just walk away without saying what had been on my mind for years. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, my voice shaky. "But I do know this. We're here now. And we're not leaving until we get some answers. For us, for the lives you missed." Daniel's face crumbled and he nodded. "I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I'm just glad you're here." For the rest of the afternoon, we talked. Slowly, cautiously, as though we were all walking on thin ice. Daniel answered questions, explained his side, and offered what little apology he could. But the truth was, there was no easy answer to what happened. He couldn't undo the past, and neither could we. When we finally stood to leave, Daniel seemed smaller, like the years of avoidance and guilt had taken their toll. "I'm sorry," he said one last time. "I wish things had been different." I looked at Alex, who met my gaze with the same complicated mix of emotions. And then I turned back to Daniel. "We're not saying goodbye forever," I said, my voice steady now. "But this is a start, and we'll figure out what comes next. Together." As we walked out the door, the sun setting behind us, I felt a strange sense of peace settle in. There was still so much left to unpack, so many questions unanswered. But for the first time, we had opened the door. And maybe, just maybe, we could start rebuilding what had been broken so long ago. Alex nudged me. "Well, that wasn't as awful as I thought it would be." I smiled. "Yeah, not exactly a hallmark moment, but I think it's a start." "Agreed," Alex said, their eyes glinting with something close to hope. "Who knows? Maybe we'll even get to enjoy Thanksgiving this year." I laughed, feeling the first genuine lightness in my chest in weeks. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like we were walking through it alone. We had found each other after all, and maybe that was enough for now. The weeks after that encounter with Daniel passed in a blur. The awkwardness of meeting our father had faded, replaced by something that felt like a slow, hesitant truce. We kept in touch with him sporadically, checking in every now and then, and though it wasn't the reunion of dreams, it was something I never thought we'd have. The most surprising part, though, was how much our bond as siblings grew. Alex and I had gone from strangers to something close to family in the span of a few weeks. We texted every day, shared embarrassing stories from our childhoods, and even began planning more adventures together. We still didn't know how to process our past, but we started carving out a new future, one where we were no longer alone. It felt weird at first, like I was building a new life on top of an old one. But as time passed, it started to feel normal. Then came the phone call. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I picked up the phone. The screen said, "Mom," but when I answered, it wasn't her voice that greeted me. "Hey, it's me," Daniel said, sounding uncharacteristically nervous. "Dad?" My heart skipped a beat. Why was he calling? "Yeah. Listen, I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I know I've missed a lot of time, but I was wondering if you two might be interested in coming out here for Thanksgiving. Maybe we could start fresh. Together." Thanksgiving. I hadn't celebrated with him in years, hadn't even considered it. But now that the invitation was on the table, I found myself filled with an odd mix of excitement and dread. I glanced at my phone, where Alex had already messaged me. "Call me. Important." I dialed Alex's number immediately. "Yo," they answered after the first ring. "What's up?" "You will not believe who just called me," I said, pacing around the apartment. "Let me guess. Dad?" "Yeah. He wants us to come out to Arizona for Thanksgiving." There was a long pause. Wait, what? I know, it's crazy, right? Alex didn't respond right away, and I could practically feel their mind racing. After a moment, they said, Well, do you think we should go? It's kind of a big deal. I don't know. I mean, it feels like everything's moving so fast, but maybe we should give it a shot. We've been talking about trying to rebuild, right? True. But are we ready for that? I didn't have an answer. Honestly, I wasn't sure. But a part of me felt like this was the only way forward. If we didn't try, we'd always wonder what could have been. I don't know, I said, sinking into the couch. I guess I'm just scared. What if it doesn't work out? What if this whole thing blows up in our faces? I get it, Alex replied, their voice softer now. But maybe, just maybe, this is our shot. If we don't go, we'll never know if we could have made it work. It's Thanksgiving, right? A fresh start. Not perfect, but maybe something worth trying. Their words made sense, and I took a deep breath. Okay, we'll go. All right, Alex said. Let's do this. Family Thanksgiving. This could either be really great or super awkward. Either way, I'm in. We made our decision. A week later, we packed our bags, took a flight to Arizona, and landed in the small town where Daniel lived. The air was dry, the sun setting behind the distant mountains, casting everything in an amber glow. It looked so different from the city we had left behind. Daniel picked us up from the airport, and even though the tension was still there, an invisible barrier we hadn't yet crossed, it was different this time. We weren't walking in as strangers, but as two people trying to build something new. When we arrived at his house, it felt surreal. There was a table set with a modest Thanksgiving dinner: turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans, and pie. It wasn't the big family gathering I'd imagined, but it felt like a start. Daniel looked at us nervously as we sat down. I know it's not much, he said quietly, but I wanted to do something for you. I don't know how to make up for all the time we've lost, but I'm trying. I exchanged a glance with Alex, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Thanks, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. It's a start. And so we ate. Slowly, cautiously at first, but as the evening went on, something began to shift. We shared stories, laughed about small things, and even poked fun at each other. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. There were no grand confessions or tearful apologies, but there was a subtle, almost tentative understanding between us. When dessert came around, Daniel hesitated. I don't know what the future holds for us, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I want you to know I'm here now. I'll be here, if you'll have me. We didn't say anything right away. Instead, Alex took my hand under the table and we squeezed each other's fingers tightly. Maybe it wasn't about rushing into forgiveness. Maybe it was about taking one step forward, even if that step was small. Thanks, Dad, Alex said, their voice steady. We'll see what happens. One day at a time, right? I smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle in. Yeah, one day at a time. And for the first time, I believed it. Maybe we were still a little broken. Maybe things would never be as they once were. But we were here. We had come this far. And maybe that was enough. The dinner came to an end, and the evening seemed to stretch on, suspended in an uneasy but hopeful quiet. We'd made it through the first big hurdle, sharing a meal, sitting at the same table. It was progress. It felt like a fragile kind of peace, one that might crumble at the slightest push. But for the first time in years, it didn't feel like we were drowning in the past. It felt possible. Daniel sat back in his chair, his eyes flicking between Alex and me, as though he was waiting for some kind of acknowledgement, some sign that we were ready to make the next move. Look, Daniel started, his voice strained with the weight of everything unsaid. I know it's going to take time. You don't owe me forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm not running away this time. I'm not going anywhere. Alex didn't respond immediately. They just stared at him, their face unreadable. I could feel the tension building again, the air so thick you could almost cut it with a knife. We hadn't talked about the things that still mattered. The anger, the abandonment, the years of pain that Daniel's silence had caused. How could we just pretend that didn't exist? The silence between us became deafening. The kind of silence where all the things you didn't want to say came rushing to the surface. I don't know if I can just let it go, Alex finally said, their voice low but cutting. You left us. You disappeared for years and you expect us to just accept that? Like it was nothing? The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He flinched, his eyes briefly darting to the table before he met our gaze again. I know, he whispered. I know. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't strong enough. I thought if I left, maybe things would get better. For everyone. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. Wrong? I snapped, suddenly rising to my feet. You think you were wrong? You didn't just get it wrong, Dad. You ruined things. You ruined us. The room seemed to hold its breath as my voice rose, an echo of all the years of rage that had been buried inside me, the hurt I'd never known how to express, the anger that had festered since the moment he walked away. Do you know what it's like, Dad? I continued, my words coming faster now. To grow up feeling like you're broken, like something's missing inside of you and never know why? To spend every year wondering where you are, why you didn't care enough to come back? We needed you, and you were nowhere to be found. I saw Daniel's face twist in pain, but I didn't care. I needed him to hear it. He needed to hear the weight of the years that he had just let go. I never wanted to hurt you, Daniel said, his voice cracking. But I hurt you, and I hurt myself too. I know there's no excuse for what I did, and I'm so sorry. I shook my head, my vision blurry from the tears that had started to well up in my eyes. Sorry doesn't change anything. You can't just say sorry and expect it to be okay. The room was silent for a moment, and I could feel the weight of my words hanging in the air. It wasn't enough to make him understand. It wasn't enough to fix everything. We had all been broken by the years he had been gone. There was no way to undo that damage. And yet, in the depths of my anger, I felt a shift. A tiny, almost imperceptible shift. Something was changing between us, but it was a slow burn. It wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't be quick. But maybe, just maybe, it was worth fighting for. I don't know if we'll ever get back to what we should have been, I said, my voice softer now, as I looked at Alex and then at Daniel. But I don't want to just walk away from you. Not now. Not again. Alex was quiet for a long time, their face unreadable. Then finally they spoke, their words heavy with meaning. I don't know if we'll ever get to the point where we forgive you, but I do know that we're here now. That's all I can promise. Daniel nodded, his eyes glistening with tears that he was trying to hide. He took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping as if a weight had been lifted. Thank you. Thank you both. I know it'll take time. But I'll be here, and I'll prove to you that I mean it. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. He wasn't perfect. Far from it. But I could see the pain, the regret, the effort in his eyes. It was a start. Not the end of our story, but maybe the beginning of something that had been waiting for years to unfold. As we stood up to leave, the air seemed lighter. Not perfect, not fixed, but a little less heavy. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was drowning in the silence of the past. Alex grabbed my hand, giving it a tight squeeze. One day at a time, right? They said, their voice filled with determination. Yeah, I whispered back. One day at a time. As we walked out the door, a cold wind blew through the night, but it didn't feel like the storm was over. It felt like it was finally beginning. And maybe, just maybe, we would weather it together. And though the road ahead would be long and uncertain, I knew that this was a story we weren't done telling yet. I ghosted my boyfriend for a year. Now he's marrying my best friend. I never expected to see Ethan again, least of all at the engagement party of my best friend, Olivia. But there he was, standing beside her, his hand resting comfortably on the small of her back, the same way he used to hold me. A year ago, I disappeared from his life without a word. No explanation, no goodbye. Just one moment. We were inseparable, and the next, I was gone. I thought I was doing him a favor. I thought I was protecting him from my mess. Now, as I stood in the middle of the crowded ballroom, champagne glass trembling in my hand, my heart threatened to punch its way out of my ribcage. "Claire?" Olivia's voice pulled me from my trance. She beamed, oblivious to the turmoil churning inside me. "Oh my God, I didn't know you were back in town." I forced a smile. "Yeah, just got back." She pulled me into a hug, smelling of roses and champagne. "You have to meet my fiancé," she gushed, turning to the man standing beside her, as if I hadn't already seen him. Ethan's hazel eyes widened when they met mine, shock flickering across his face before he masked it with a polite smile. "Claire," he said evenly, offering his hand. For a second, I considered running again, but then I shook his hand, his familiar warmth sending a shiver up my spine. Olivia, unaware of the tension thickening between us, laughed. "Wait, you two know each other?" Neither of us spoke. My throat was dry. I had ghosted this man, left him with nothing but questions, heartbreak, and silence. And now he was standing beside my best friend, wearing an engagement ring she had chosen. Ethan finally cleared his throat. "Yeah, a long time ago." That hurt. I wanted to tell him why I left. I wanted to scream that it wasn't because I didn't love him, but because I did. Too much. I had been diagnosed with a rare illness a year ago. It was sudden, terrifying, and completely derailed my life. I couldn't bear to drag Ethan down with me, so I disappeared. I convinced myself it was better that way. But now, looking at him, I realized the damage I had done. I had broken him, and Olivia had been the one to pick up the pieces. "Excuse me," I muttered before Olivia could ask any more questions. I needed air. I barely made it to the terrace before I felt Ethan behind me. "Claire," he said softly. I turned, swallowing hard. "You're marrying Olivia." A sad smile tugged at his lips. "You left, Claire. I didn't have a choice but to move on." I nodded, blinking back the sting in my eyes. "I know." Silence stretched between us, thick with unsaid words. "Why?" he finally asked. I could have told him the truth. I could have told him everything. But then I glanced inside, where Olivia was laughing with her guests, her happiness radiating like sunlight. I loved them both too much to ruin what they had. So I exhaled and gave Ethan the lie he needed to hear. "Because I didn't love you enough." His face twisted. Pain, disbelief. But then he nodded, just once. "Goodbye, Claire," he said. And just like that, I lost him all over again. As Ethan walked away, I gripped the terrace railing, my knuckles white. The truth burned inside me, clawing at my ribs, begging to be set free. But what good would it do now? I had already made my choice. "Claire?" I turned to see Olivia stepping onto the terrace, her brows pinched together in concern. "What's going on?" she asked. "You and Ethan? That was weird. Did something happen between you two?" I forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. We used to know each other." Her eyes flickered with something. Curiosity, maybe suspicion. But she shook it off with a smile. "Well, I'm just happy you're here. I missed you." Guilt tightened around my throat like a noose. She looped her arm through mine and pulled me back into the party, and I let her. What else was I supposed to do? Tell her that I had once loved the man she was about to marry? That I still did? That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed. Ethan, meet me tomorrow. One last time. Please, I shouldn't have responded. I shouldn't have agreed. But my fingers moved before my brain could stop them. The next afternoon, I met him at a quiet cafe away from the city's buzz. He was already there, a coffee in front of him, fingers tapping absently against the ceramic cup. When he saw me, something softened in his face, but it was guarded, like he was bracing for more pain. You came, he said. I sat down. Yeah. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned forward, his voice low. I don't believe you. My heart pounded. Believe what? That you didn't love me enough. His eyes searched mine, waiting for me to crack. You weren't lying when you said it, were you? I bit my lip, tasting regret. Ethan. Because if you were, Claire, tell me now. He cut in, his voice sharper. Tell me, and I swear to God, I will walk away and marry Olivia without a second thought. Tears blurred my vision. This was it, the moment of truth. I could keep lying. Let him go. Let Olivia have the life she deserved. Or I could be selfish for once. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. I left because I was sick, I whispered. I didn't want you to go through it with me. I thought it was better if you hated me instead. His entire body went still. Sick? I nodded, wiping at my eyes. It's under control now, but back then, I didn't know if I would make it. A muscle in his jaw twitched. So you left me in the dark? You let me think I wasn't enough? I thought I was doing the right thing. I choked. He let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. God, Claire, do you know how much I loved you? How much I still... He stopped himself, exhaling. My chest ached. It's too late now. He looked away, jaw clenched. And for the first time since I saw him at the party, I realized he wasn't wearing his engagement ring. You're getting married tomorrow, I reminded him, more to myself than to him. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. I know. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Then he stood. And for the second time, I braced myself for him to walk away. But instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a velvet box, and placed it on the table. I was going to propose to you that night, he murmured, before you disappeared. My breath caught in my throat. I loved you, Claire, and I think a part of me always will. He swallowed hard. But tomorrow I'm marrying Olivia. I can't do this to her. I nodded, blinking back tears. I know. He hesitated, then turned and walked out of the cafe. This time I didn't chase him. And this time he didn't look back. The days leading up to Ethan and Olivia's wedding passed in a blur. I watched from the sidelines, playing the part of the supportive best friend. But every glance toward Ethan felt like a punch to my gut. I had destroyed something beautiful, something real, and now I had to watch as he promised forever to someone else. On the morning of the wedding, I was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my dress, trying to prepare myself for the inevitable. The church was packed with guests, and I could hear the faint hum of conversation, the buzz of excitement filling the air. But all I could think about was how it had come to this, how I had pushed Ethan away, how I had let him slip through my fingers. There was a knock at my door. Claire? I turned to see Olivia standing there, her eyes sparkling, her wedding dress already on. Can I come in? Of course, I said, forcing a smile. She walked in, taking in my expression. Are you okay? You're looking a little distant. I nodded quickly, trying to shake the heaviness in my chest. I'm fine, just nervous, I guess. Big day. Olivia smiled and sat beside me. I'm so glad you're here, Claire. You're the best friend I've ever had. I can't believe I'm getting married today. I used to dream about this moment, and now it's real. I swallowed hard. You deserve it, Liv. You deserve everything. She hugged me, and I squeezed her back, my throat tight with unshed tears. "I'm glad you're back in my life," she said softly. "I've missed you." I nodded again, trying not to let the weight of my emotions show. "Me too." When she pulled away, she grinned. "I'm marrying Ethan today. Isn't that crazy?" I forced a smile, nodding. "It is. It really is." "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked, her eyes searching mine for something deeper. "You look like you've been through a war." I took a deep breath. I couldn't keep lying to her. Not anymore. "Liv, I have to tell you something." Her smile faltered. "What is it?" I I never stopped loving Ethan. I thought I could let go of him, but I didn't. And I left him because I was afraid he would get hurt by me. But I never should have done it. And now seeing you two together, I just don't know how to fix it." Her face was unreadable for a long moment, and I held my breath. Was she angry? Hurt? Finally, she reached out and touched my hand. "I know, Claire. I know." My heart skipped a beat. "What?" She smiled gently. "I know about you and Ethan. I always knew. It's why I was afraid to get close to you at first. But then, I saw how much he hurt when you left. And when I came into the picture, I thought maybe he was moving on. But I've always known. I've always known you were the one he loved." I blinked, stunned. "Olivia, why didn't you tell me?" She sighed. "Because I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to be the one to take him from you. And I didn't want to lose you either. So I kept quiet. But I also didn't want him to be alone. I never wanted to be the reason he couldn't move forward." I felt like the room was spinning. This entire time, Olivia had known. She had known about us, about my feelings, and yet she still chose to move forward with the wedding. "Liv, I'm not angry, Claire," she interrupted softly. "I'm not. I want you to be happy too. But we both know that Ethan deserves someone who can be there for him without all the baggage. And I'm not perfect, but I'm here now. And I think that's enough for him." I stared at her, my chest heavy with a mix of guilt and gratitude. "Olivia, you're a better friend than I deserve." She squeezed my hand, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm just trying to do what's right. For him. For you. For us." Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door again. It was Ethan. "I need to speak with you," he said quietly, his face a mask of calm, though I could see the storm behind his eyes. Olivia looked at me and then back at Ethan. "It's your moment, Ethan. Go on." She kissed my cheek, her voice soft. "Don't let him go without saying what you need to." With that, she left us alone. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes locked on mine. "I need you to understand something, Claire," he began, his voice tight. "I'm marrying Olivia because I love her. I do. But that doesn't mean I've ever stopped loving you. And I need you to know that. I need you to understand that what we had, it was real. It was everything." I swallowed, my heart aching. "But you're with her now, Ethan. You're getting married." He nodded, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "I know. And I'm not asking you to change anything. I'm not asking you to come back. But I need you to forgive me for moving on." "I do," I whispered. "I forgive you. I always have." "Then let me go," he said softly. "Let me go so we can both move on." I nodded, fighting back the tears that were threatening to fall. "I will. I promise." Ethan smiled faintly, then leaned in, pressing a kiss to my forehead. And as he turned to leave, I realized that this was the moment I had to truly let him go. For both of us. I watched him disappear down the hallway, knowing that this chapter of my life was finally over, and that no matter where life took us from here, we would both be okay. The wedding ceremony was a blur of white dresses, flowers, and music. Olivia stood at the altar, radiant, her eyes fixed on Ethan as he stood beside her, his expression a careful mask. I watched from my seat, my heart aching with every passing moment. I had given him up for her. No, for both of them. But the emptiness inside me didn't fade with time. It had only deepened. As they exchanged vows, I couldn't help but think about the past, about the love that was once ours, the one that I had walked away from. It felt like I was watching someone else's life unfold, a life that could have been mine. When the ceremony ended, they shared their first kiss as husband and wife. The crowd erupted into applause, and for a moment, everything felt surreal. Ethan and Olivia were finally together, and I was still standing on the sidelines of their love story. But then, as they walked down the aisle, hand in hand, Ethan glanced over at me. Just for a second, his gaze met mine, and for that instant, it was like time stood still. There was no crowd, no wedding guests, just us. The years, the heartbreak, the silence between us. It was all there in his eyes, and in mine. But then, just as quickly as it had come, the moment passed, and he was walking with Olivia, his smile bright, his arm around her waist. I blinked, forcing my attention back to the present. After the ceremony, I found myself standing at the edge of the reception, away from the laughter and chatter, watching them. Ethan and Olivia were surrounded by friends and family, their joy palpable. But as I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Claire? I turned to see Olivia standing beside me, her eyes searching mine. I know you've been feeling off today, she said gently. But you're here, and I'm so happy you are. You're my best friend, Claire. I need you to be part of this new chapter no matter what's happened between you and Ethan. He loves me, and I love him. But that doesn't change how much I care about you. Her words were a balm to my wounds, a reminder that, despite everything, our friendship still stood. I'm trying, Liv. I really am. She smiled softly and took my hand, pulling me back toward the party. I'm not asking for anything other than your support. I'm not trying to replace you. I promise. We joined the group, and as the night went on, I found myself in a strange kind of acceptance. I had lost Ethan, but I hadn't lost Olivia. And maybe that was enough. Later, after the last of the guests had left, I found myself alone in the garden, the cool night air brushing against my skin. The stars above seemed to shimmer in a way that felt almost like a sign, a reassurance that life would go on. I wasn't sure where my journey would take me next, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. For me, for the woman I was still becoming. A voice broke through my thoughts. Claire? I turned and found Ethan standing there, his hands shoved into the pockets of his tuxedo jacket. What are you doing out here? He asked, his voice soft, almost tentative. I smiled faintly. Just thinking. You? Same, he said, stepping closer. You okay? I nodded. Yeah, I will be. He studied me for a moment before speaking again. I've been thinking about everything. About us. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling over me like a heavy fog. Ethan. I don't regret anything, Claire, he said quietly. Not a single moment we shared. But I can't keep living in the past. I need to be here with Olivia. I've made my choice. The finality in his words stung, but I nodded. I know. He took a deep breath, his eyes meeting mine. I'm sorry for everything. What I didn't say. What I didn't do. Ethan. My voice cracked, but I cleared my throat. You don't have to apologize. We both made choices. He reached for my hand, holding it for a moment before letting go. I'm sorry for the way it ended, for how much it hurt. But you were right, Claire. I had to move on. And I did. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I understand. I really do. He smiled, a sad, bittersweet smile. I'll always care about you, Claire. But I need to do this. I need to be the man I promised Olivia I'd be. I know, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. There was a long silence before he spoke again. "Goodbye, Claire." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. And as he walked back toward the house, I realized that this was the last time I would ever see him in this way. It was the end of a chapter, but the beginning of something new. I just had to find it. As the stars twinkled above, I took a deep breath, closing my eyes and whispered into the night. "Goodbye, Ethan. I'll always love you." But now I had to let go. The days after the wedding were some of the hardest of my life. Olivia and Ethan were happily married, and every time I saw them together, I couldn't help but feel the sting of what might have been. It wasn't jealousy, it was grief. Grief for the love I lost, for the choices I made that I couldn't undo. But more than that, it was grief for the person I had been and the person I was trying to become. I kept my distance from them for a while, not out of bitterness, but because I needed time to process. Olivia, being the understanding friend she was, never pushed. She let me take the space I needed, and though it pained me, I knew it was for the best. But a few weeks later, she called me. "Claire, I need to talk to you." I felt my stomach tighten, unsure of what to expect. "I'll be right there," I said, hanging up the phone before I could talk myself out of it. When I arrived at her apartment, Olivia was sitting on the couch, looking unusually serious. Her wedding ring sparkled on her finger, a constant reminder of the life they were building together. But today, there was a weight in her eyes, something I couldn't place. "Liv?" I asked softly, sitting beside her. She looked at me, her expression unreadable for a moment before she sighed deeply. "I have to confess something to you." My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "I've been thinking a lot lately. About you. About Ethan." She paused, her gaze dropping to her hands. "And about how I've been feeling." I frowned, uncertain of where this was going. "Liv, what are you talking about?" She met my eyes, her voice trembling slightly. "Ethan and we've been having some problems. I didn't want to admit it to you, but I think it's time. There's this distance between us now that wasn't there before. And I don't know how to fix it." My breath caught in my throat. "Olivia, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I think I married him for the wrong reasons." She stood up, pacing. "I thought it was what I wanted, what we wanted. But I don't know if it's enough anymore. I don't know if I'm the one who can make him happy." "Liv, no, you're—" I started, but she shook her head. "I'm serious, Claire." She turned to face me, her eyes full of emotion. "I think I've been holding on to this idea of what our life should look like. And in doing so, I've lost sight of what he needs. What we need." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Olivia, don't say that. You love him. You've always loved him." She paused, her eyes searching mine, as if looking for some kind of answer that neither of us had. "I do love him, but I also know what he's been through. And I don't want to keep pretending I can be the person he needs. Not when he's still in love with you, Claire." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What?" "He still thinks about you. He still loves you. I know it. And I can't keep holding on to something that's built on a lie. I've been so caught up in my own feelings, I didn't see the truth. You were always the one for him. And I've been standing in the way." My mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Was this really happening? Was she giving me the chance I thought I had lost forever? "Olivia, you can't—" I started, but she cut me off. "I don't want to get in the way of your happiness anymore. I can't. You deserve a chance at the life you both dreamed of. And I don't want to be the one holding you back." I felt the tears well up in my eyes. "Liv, please don't say this. You're my best friend. You've always been there for me. I don't want to hurt you." She took a deep breath, her face pale. "I know. But I think you need to go to him. I think you need to figure out what's left between you two. Because I don't want to be the one stopping you from getting what you truly want." I stared at her in disbelief, my heart heavy with the weight of her words. She was giving me a chance, and yet I wasn't sure if I was ready to take it. Olivia, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Claire. Just go to him. Please. For both of you. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind racing with the possibilities. What if I went to Ethan and he didn't feel the same way anymore? What if he was truly over me? What if I ruined everything by showing up at the wrong moment? But in the end, I knew there was only one thing I had to do. I grabbed my coat and drove to his apartment, my heart pounding as I parked outside. My hands shook as I knocked on his door. When he opened it, his face was a mixture of surprise and hesitation. Claire? I need to talk to you, I said, my voice trembling. He stepped aside and I walked into the apartment, the familiar scent of his cologne and the quiet stillness of his home pulling at my heart. You need to talk? He repeated, his voice quiet. I nodded, swallowing hard. I'm not sure what I'm doing here, but I need you to know something. I made a mistake. I left you, and I thought I was doing the right thing, but I wasn't. I should have fought for you. For us. I still love you, Ethan. I always have. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes unreadable. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, his hand reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. I never stopped loving you, Claire. His voice was a whisper. But I don't know if we can go back. I don't know if we can fix what's broken. I took a step closer. I don't want to go back. I want to move forward. Together. No more mistakes. No more running away. He stood there for a moment, his eyes searching mine. And then, without a word, he closed the distance between us, pulling me into his arms. I'm scared, Claire, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. But I'm willing to try. For us. For whatever's left. And in that moment, everything felt possible again. The days after that moment felt like a dream. Ethan and I were slowly rebuilding, carefully picking up the pieces of our broken past. We didn't know what the future held, but there was a spark of something familiar, something undeniable between us. For the first time in a long while, I felt hope. But life, as it often does, has a way of testing us when we least expect it. A few weeks after Ethan and I started to talk again, I received an unexpected message from Olivia. It was late at night, and I was sitting on the balcony of my apartment, the soft hum of the city around me. Her text was simple but direct. We need to talk. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. My heart raced, and a part of me already knew. This wasn't just a friendly chat. It was something more. Something I wasn't ready for. The next morning, I met her at the same coffee shop where we used to sit for hours, talking about everything and nothing. She was waiting for me, her eyes downcast, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee. When she looked up at me, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability. Claire, she began softly, her voice shaking. I've been thinking a lot, and I need you to know the truth. I sat down across from her, my heart already pounding in my chest. What's going on, Liv? She took a deep breath, her fingers trembling as they gripped her cup. It's about Ethan. I thought I could move on. I really did. But the truth is, I can't. I can't keep pretending that I don't love him, that I didn't marry him because I thought I could make it work, but deep down, I knew I was never the one for him. My breath caught in my throat. Olivia, you're his wife. You've built a life together. You told me you were okay with this. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I lied to you. I thought if I kept pretending it would go away, but it didn't. I've been holding on to a lie for months, Claire. I can't keep doing this. I'm not the person he needs. You are. I know I can't take him from you, not anymore. My heart broke in my chest. I didn't know what to say, how to process this. But then Olivia stood up, her face filled with a kind of resigned calm. I'm leaving, Claire. I'm moving out. I want you to have a chance at what you both deserve. I want you to have him." "Olivia, wait," I whispered, standing up. "Don't—" But she was already walking out of the coffee shop, leaving me frozen in place. I stood there, my mind a whirlwind of confusion. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. This wasn't the plan. Ethan and I were just starting to rebuild, just starting to see if there was a future for us. And now Olivia was giving up, letting go. Everything we had been through, all the heartbreak, all the lost time, had led to this moment. And I didn't know if I was ready for the consequences. That evening, I stood at the doorstep of Ethan's apartment, my heart pounding. The world seemed to stop around me, and all I could hear was the beating of my own heart. Olivia had made her choice. Now, it was up to me to decide if I could still love him the way I once did, if we could pick up where we had left off. When Ethan opened the door, his face lit up, but as he saw the look in my eyes, his expression faltered. "Claire?" "Ethan," I whispered, my voice shaking. "We need to talk." He stepped aside, his face full of concern. "What's wrong?" I closed the door behind me, the silence between us heavy. "Olivia left you," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. He blinked, stunned. "What do you mean she left me?" "She's gone," I said, my heart breaking. "She told me everything. She can't be with you because she knows you still love me. She's letting you go, Ethan. She's giving us a chance." For a long moment, he said nothing, his eyes searching mine. The room felt like it was closing in on us, the weight of the situation suffocating. Finally, he spoke. "What do we do now, Claire?" I felt the tears sting my eyes. "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't know if we can fix what's broken." And in that moment, I realized the love we once had might never return. What we had was precious, but time and mistakes had changed us both. The space between us felt insurmountable, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't reach him the way I used to. "I need time," I said, my voice trembling. "I need to figure out who I am, without him, without you. I've spent too much of my life clinging to things that weren't meant to be. I need to let go." He didn't argue, didn't try to stop me. He just nodded, the sadness in his eyes reflecting the same brokenness I felt inside. "I'll always love you, Claire," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But maybe it's time we both moved on." I nodded, my chest tightening. "Goodbye, Ethan." And as I walked out of his apartment for the last time, I felt a sense of finality settle in my bones. The love story that could have been, that should have been, was over. We were all broken, each in our own way. And sometimes, no matter how much you want to make things work, it's just too late. I didn't look back as I stepped into the night. Sometimes the hardest part of moving on is accepting that you can't go back. You can only move forward. And that, in the end, is the most dramatic truth of all. I found out my parents aren't actually my parents, but my kidnappers. I was 16 when I found out my entire life was a lie. It all started with a school project, a simple ancestry assignment. We had to trace our family tree, and our teacher suggested we use DNA testing for extra credit. It seemed harmless enough, so I convinced my parents to let me take one of those at-home genetic tests. My mom hesitated at first, but Dad shrugged it off. "Go ahead, kiddo," he said. "It'll be fun." A few weeks later, the results came in. I opened the email on my phone and felt my stomach drop. No genetic match to my parents. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I rushed home, my heart pounding, and confronted them. "Mom, Dad, this test says we're not related." Silence. My mother's face went pale, her hand trembling as she set down her coffee cup. My father didn't even look surprised. "Sweetheart," Mom started, her voice unnaturally calm. "Those tests aren't always accurate. You know that, right?" but something in her tone, too measured, too forced, made my skin crawl. I wasn't buying it. I ran upstairs and locked my door, my mind racing. That night, I searched online for missing children cases, my heart hammering as I scrolled through photos of kids who had been taken years ago. And then I saw it. A picture of a toddler with dark hair, big brown eyes just like mine. Her name was Emily Carter. She had been kidnapped from her backyard when she was 2 years old. 20 seconds of staring at that photo, and my entire world shattered. I wasn't who I thought I was. The next morning, I skipped school and went straight to the police station. My hands shook as I handed them a printed copy of the missing child report. "I think this is me," I whispered. Everything after that felt like a blur. The officers took me into a room, asked me questions, and took another DNA sample. My so-called parents were arrested that evening, and then came the hardest part, meeting my real family. My biological parents, the Carters, had never stopped searching for me. When I saw them for the first time, my mother broke down crying, clutching me like she'd never let go. My father stood frozen, tears running down his face. I should have felt whole, complete. But I didn't. I still loved the people who raised me, even though they had stolen me. I hated them for what they did, but they were the only parents I had ever known. And now, I had to start over with strangers who were supposed to be my real family. The first night in my real home felt suffocating. My biological mother, Lisa, had insisted I sleep in my old nursery, preserved like a time capsule from when I was 2 years old. The walls were a faded pastel pink, shelves lined with stuffed animals that I had no memory of. A framed picture of my baby self sat on the nightstand, staring back at me like a ghost of the past. I didn't belong here. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in my own life. My fake parents were in jail, awaiting trial. I hadn't spoken to them since the police took them away. Part of me wanted to scream at them. Part of me wanted to hear their voices again. Who were they? Monsters? Or just two people who made a terrible decision? The next few weeks were a blur of therapy sessions, news reports, and awkward family dinners with people who desperately wanted to make up for lost time. Lisa and Mark tried to be patient, but they were always watching me, as if waiting for some sign that I was still their little Emily. But I wasn't. I was Chloe. That's the name my kidnappers had given me. The name I had lived with for 16 years. One afternoon, I found Lisa sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through an old scrapbook. When she saw me, she hesitated, then patted the chair beside her. "I know this is hard," she said softly, "but you are Emily. You're our daughter." I swallowed, staring down at the open page. Baby pictures. A birthday party I didn't remember. "What if I don't feel like her?" I whispered. Lisa's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But instead, she reached for my hand. "You don't have to be who you were. We just want you to be you, whatever that means." It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. But then the letters started arriving. At first, I thought it was a mistake. The first one was slipped under the door of my new bedroom, a simple note on a torn piece of paper. "They aren't telling you everything." No signature. I showed it to Mark, who assured me it was probably from a nosy reporter trying to stir up drama. I tried to believe him, until the second letter came. This one was more chilling. "You need to ask them about the night you disappeared." I confronted Lisa and Mark again, but their reactions scared me. Lisa's hands shook as she grabbed the note, and Mark turned pale. "There's nothing to talk about," he said too quickly. "Don't let this get in your head." But it was in my head, and the next letter changed everything. It arrived in a plain white envelope slipped into our mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, a grainy black and white image of a young couple holding a baby, my fake parents. And scrawled on the back were 4 words that made my blood run cold. The words burned in my mind. "They didn't steal you." It made no sense. How could they not have stolen me? The DNA test, the missing child reports, the police investigation, it all confirmed I was Emily Carter, a kidnapped child. Right? I gripped the photo, my hands shaking. My biological parents had told me they'd searched for me for 14 years. They showed me old news articles, missing posters, even police reports filled with dead ends. But if my fake parents didn't steal me, then how did I end up with them? I needed answers. That night, after everyone went to bed, I grabbed my phone and did something I wasn't sure was a good idea. I called the only people who might know the truth, my kidnappers. My heart pounded as I waited for someone to pick up. I had memorized their inmate numbers from the news, and after some digging, I found a number for jailhouse calls. I wasn't sure if they'd answer. Then, a click. Chloe? It was my fake mom's voice. Quiet, trembling. I almost hung up. Almost. But something inside me pushed forward. I got a letter, I whispered. Someone's telling me you didn't steal me. What does that mean? Silence. Then a shaky breath. Honey, we didn't know how to tell you. My stomach twisted. Tell me what? Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. We adopted you. My breath caught. Number, that's not possible. The police said, they're wrong, she interrupted. We didn't take you, Chloe. We thought you were ours. We thought it was legal. I stood up so fast my chair nearly tipped over. What are you saying? There was a rustling on the other end. My fake dad's voice came on. Rough. Tired. We adopted you through a private agency. They told us everything was legal. But looking back, we should have questioned it. My mind spun. A private adoption? That didn't make sense. If it was legal, why did the police call it a kidnapping? Who gave me to you? I demanded. Silence again. Then my fake mom whispered something that sent chills down my spine. Your real parents. I hung up without saying another word. My whole body felt numb. If my biological parents had given me away, why had they spent 14 years searching for me? Or had they? I stormed downstairs, my pulse racing. Lisa and Mark were still awake, sitting at the kitchen table. When they saw me clutching the photo, they exchanged a look. You lied to me, I said. Lisa's face paled. Sweetheart, what? I slammed the photo on the table. Tell me the truth. Now. They didn't answer right away. Mark rubbed his temples. Lisa swallowed hard. Then she whispered, We were young, Emily. We made a mistake. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. What? What mistake? Lisa's lips trembled. She stopped, taking a shaky breath. We gave you up. Number, no, this couldn't be happening. We were struggling, Mark added. Money was tight. We weren't ready. A private adoption agency reached out, said they could find you a good home. We thought we were doing the right thing. I stared at them, my hands shaking. Then why did you report me as kidnapped? Lisa's eyes filled with tears. Because we changed our minds, she whispered. And by the time we wanted you back, you were gone. I couldn't breathe. I had spent weeks believing I was stolen, ripped away from my real family. But the truth was worse. They hadn't lost me. They had given me away. And they let me grow up believing I was stolen because it was easier than admitting they had abandoned me. I backed away, my heart pounding. I need to go, I muttered. Emily, please. But I was already out the door, running into the night, away from the strangers who had lied to me, away from the people I didn't know if I could ever trust again, because I wasn't stolen. I was unwanted. And I had no idea who I really was anymore. The cold air stung my skin as I ran. My heart pounded against my ribs. My breath came in sharp gasps, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I had spent 16 years believing my whole life was a lie, believing I had been stolen, ripped away from the people who loved me. But the truth was even worse. I wasn't kidnapped. I was abandoned. And when my real parents changed their minds, they called it a kidnapping instead of admitting they had given me away. How do you even process something like that? I kept running, barely aware of where I was going, until I found myself at the one place that still felt familiar: my old house. The one where I had lived my whole life before everything changed. The one that didn't belong to me anymore. The porch light was off, the windows dark, empty. A lump formed in my throat. My fake parents, no, my adoptive parents, had been arrested weeks ago. Their trial was coming up soon, and even though part of me hated them for lying to me, another part of me just missed them. I sat down on the porch steps, my legs shaking, and buried my face in my hands. I didn't belong anywhere. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I know the truth. Meet me at the park. Midnight. Come alone. I lifted my head, my skin prickling with unease. Who was this? How did they have my number? And more importantly, what truth were they talking about? I should have ignored the text. I should have gone back to my so-called real parents' house and demanded more answers. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself walking through the park at 11:57 p.m., my hoodie pulled up, my hands stuffed into my pockets to hide my trembling fingers. The playground stood empty, swings creaking in the wind. The streetlights flickered. Then I saw them. A man, sitting on a bench, his hood pulled low over his face. I hesitated. "Are you the one who texted me?" He nodded but didn't look up. "You got the letters, didn't you?" My stomach twisted. "Yeah. Who are you?" He exhaled slowly, then lifted his head. The glow of a nearby streetlight illuminated his face. He was older, maybe late 30s, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Familiar. Too familiar. Because I had seen them before, in a picture. A missing person picture. I sucked in a sharp breath. "You're Dylan Carter," he finished. "Your brother." My heart stopped. I had a brother I never knew about. I stumbled back, my mind racing. Lisa and Mark never mentioned a brother. The news reports never mentioned a brother. "You're lying," I whispered. "If I had a brother, why didn't anyone tell me?" Dylan gave a dry laugh. "Because I ran away when I was 16, and they don't like talking about the kids they lost." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "Kids?" He leaned forward. "You weren't the first." My breath hitched. Dylan reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me, his fingers shaking slightly. I unfolded it, and my blood ran cold. It was an old missing persons report. Not mine. A different baby. A little girl. Same last name. Same story. Gone at 2 years old. Reported as kidnapped. I looked up at Dylan, my hands shaking. "Who is this?" His jaw clenched. "Our sister, Amelia." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My real parents had given away another child, and when they regretted it, they called it a kidnapping. How many secrets had they buried? How many lives had they ruined? Dylan stood up, shoving his hands in his pockets. "They're not the people you think they are, Emily." His voice was quiet but firm. "And if you stay with them, you'll never know the whole truth." I swallowed hard. Everything I thought I knew had already been shattered. But now, staring at my so-called brother, I realized this wasn't just about me. And I wasn't the only one they had lied to. I gripped the missing person report, my fingers trembling. Another child. Another kidnapping. I stared at Dylan, my so-called brother, my mind racing. If what he was saying was true, if Lisa and Mark had done this before, then everything I thought I knew about them was a lie. And I needed to find out how deep that lie went. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Amelia. What happened to her?" Dylan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "I don't know," he admitted. "She was gone before I was old enough to remember her. All I know is one day she was there and the next, she wasn't. Mom and Dad never talked about her. And when I asked, they'd just say something bad happened. His jaw tightened. It wasn't until I was older that I started putting things together. That's when I ran away. I swallowed hard. And you think they did the same thing to me? Dylan met my eyes. I don't think it. I know it. The break-in. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe I just wanted proof. Maybe I was reckless. Or maybe deep down, I was afraid Dylan was right. But an hour later, I found myself standing outside Lisa and Mark's house, my heart pounding as I slipped a bobby pin into the back door's lock. It clicked open. I stepped inside. The house was silent, dark. My hands were sweaty, my breath shallow. I had lived here for 2 weeks, but suddenly it felt like enemy territory. I needed to find something, anything that proved they were lying. Dylan had told me to check their bedroom. That's where they kept all the files, he had said. Anything about you, about Amelia. I crept upstairs, my pulse hammering in my ears. When I reached their room, I hesitated for only a second before slipping inside. Their closet. I yanked open the doors, my hands fumbling through boxes, drawers, shelves. I was about to give up when my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. A safe. I knelt down, my heart racing. It had a keypad lock. No way I was getting in. Then I noticed a small yellow sticky note stuck to the side. A 6-digit code. I typed it in. Beep. The safe popped open. I stared inside, and my stomach dropped. The truth, buried in paper, inside the safe were stacks of documents. Old adoption papers, birth certificates, a medical bracelet with my name on it, Emily Carter, and another one, Amelia Carter. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the papers. Some of them were official-looking adoption records. Others were handwritten notes. Then I found the one that made my blood run cold. A receipt, dated 14 years ago, with an amount $30,000, and a note at the bottom, final payment received. I slapped a hand over my mouth. Lisa and Mark hadn't just given me away. They had sold me. Footsteps. I froze. Someone was in the house. I shoved the papers back into the safe, but it was too late. The bedroom door creaked open. Emily? Lisa. I spun around, my pulse pounding in my ears. She stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. But I could see the way her hands clenched into fists. "What are you doing in here?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. I swallowed hard. "Tell me the truth." Her eyes flickered to the open safe, and something in her face changed. A coldness settled in her gaze. "You shouldn't have come here," she murmured. My stomach clenched. "Did you sell me?" She didn't answer. "Did you sell Amelia too?" Still nothing. My hands curled into fists. "Who bought me, Lisa?" "Who paid for me?" A long silence. Then she sighed. "You were never supposed to find out." Something about the way she said it, the resignation in her voice, sent chills down my spine. Because she wasn't denying it. She stepped forward. "Come downstairs, Emily. Let's talk." I took a step back. Then another. She lunged. I barely had time to react before she grabbed my wrist, her nails digging into my skin. "You need to forget about this," she hissed. "You don't understand the people you're dealing with." Panic surged through me. "Let me go." "Emily?" I twisted, yanking free, and bolted for the door. She chased me. I flew down the stairs, my feet barely touching the ground. My only thought was, get out. Get out. Get out. I reached the front door, wrenched it open. A hand clamped down on my shoulder. I screamed. Then, a loud crash. Lisa's grip loosened. She stumbled back, and I turned to see Dylan standing there, breathing hard, holding a crowbar. "Run," he said. I didn't hesitate. The escape, we sprinted to his car, my heart slamming against my ribs. As we peeled away from the house, I glanced back, just in time to see Lisa standing in the doorway, watching us. Not angry, not scared, just waiting. A chill ran down my spine. I turned to Dylan. She admitted it. My voice was shaky. She sold me. His jaw tightened. Yeah, and I bet she wasn't working alone. I swallowed hard. Then who was? Dylan didn't answer right away. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. The same people who are still looking for you. I stared at him. What do you mean, still? He gripped the steering wheel. I mean, whoever paid for you in the first place might want you back. I felt my stomach drop. I thought my nightmare was over. But it was just beginning. Dylan drove fast, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. Lisa and Mark had sold me. That much I knew. But to who? And why had my biological parents reported me as kidnapped when they were the ones who had given me away? None of it made sense. And the worst part? Someone, whoever paid for me, might still be looking for me. The weight of that realization settled in my chest like a stone. I glanced at Dylan. His jaw was clenched, eyes fixed on the road. You know more than you're telling me, I said. He didn't respond. Dylan? Still nothing. I reached out and touched his arm, forcing him to look at me. Tell me the truth. Who bought me? His expression was unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he sighed. There was a name, he admitted, buried in the paperwork. It wasn't on any official records, just handwritten on the side of one of the documents. My heartbeat quickened. What was it? He hesitated. Then quietly, he said, Blackwood Foundation. A chill ran down my spine. What is that? Dylan shook his head. I don't know, but whatever it is, I don't think they ever stopped watching you. My breath caught. The letters, the warnings, the feeling that someone was always just a step ahead of me. Was it them? Had they been waiting all this time? I opened my mouth to ask another question when Dylan suddenly cursed under his breath. I turned. Headlights. A black SUV was speeding toward us from behind. No headlights, no plates. And it was getting closer. Dylan, hold on. The SUV rammed into us. The car spun. My body slammed against the door, glass shattering. Tires screeched. My vision blurred. And then, impact. Everything went dark. The last thing I heard, somewhere in the darkness, I heard voices. Muffled, distant. A car door creaked open. Footsteps crunched on gravel. A hand touched my face. A voice, calm, low, terrifyingly familiar, whispered, We've been looking for you, Emily. I found a hidden room in my house. You won't believe what was inside. It started with a draft, a cold breath of air that whispered through my bedroom at night, sending chills up my spine. At first, I thought it was just poor insulation. This house was old, after all. But then, one evening, as I rearranged my bookshelf, I felt it again. Stronger, colder. I pressed my hands against the wall. It felt hollow. My heart pounded as I knocked. Thump, thump, a different sound than the other walls. I traced my fingers along the edges of the wallpaper, searching, until my fingernail caught on something. A seam. With a deep breath, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and carefully slid it along the seam. The wallpaper peeled back like an old secret, revealing a narrow outline of a door I had never seen before. Adrenaline surged through me as I fumbled around, looking for a handle. There was none, just a faint circular indentation. I pressed my palm against it. Click. The door swung open into darkness. A heavy, musty scent filled my nose like dust and time itself had been trapped inside. I grabbed my phone and shined the flashlight inside. The room was small, barely the size of a walk-in closet, with stone walls covered in strange, unfamiliar symbols. In the center stood a single wooden chair. and on it sat an old leather-bound book. I stepped inside, feeling the temperature drop around me. My breath came out in a thin mist. I reached for the book, my fingers trembling as I brushed away the dust. The cover had a single word, embossed in gold. "Do not open." I should have listened. But curiosity won. My hands moved before my brain could stop them, and I flipped open the first page. The words were written in deep red ink. At least, I told myself it was ink. "To the one who reads this, know that you have already been seen." A shiver ran down my spine. I turned the page. More writing, but this time, the letters shifted, changed, rearranged themselves before my eyes. "Turn around." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, heart pounding, I turned. The chair was empty. But the book? The book was gone from my hands. It now rested on the seat, open, the pages flipping on their own. Then I heard it. A whisper, right behind me. "You shouldn't have come here." The lights in my house flickered. A cold gust slammed the hidden door shut behind me, and the whisper turned into a laugh that was not my own. I stood frozen, my pulse racing. The laughter echoed around the room, bouncing off the cold stone walls. It wasn't just a laugh. It was like the sound of 1,000 voices, layered on top of each other, speaking a language I couldn't understand. I took a step back, my mind screaming at me to run. But the door behind me was sealed tight, the air thick and suffocating. I could barely breathe. I looked down at the book again, its pages still flipping as if someone or something was controlling it. "You can't leave," the voice whispered again, this time closer, much closer. I whipped around, half expecting to see a shadowy figure standing behind me. But there was nothing. Just the empty chair, the eerie symbols on the walls, and the unsettling draft. My phone's flashlight flickered and dimmed, casting long, menacing shadows across the room. I took another step back, my fingers instinctively reaching for the handle of the door. It wouldn't budge. It was like the room itself was closing in on me, as if it had a mind of its own. "It's too late," the voice said, this time clearer. "You've unlocked it. You've awoken it." I glanced down at the book again, my hands trembling. The words on the page were shifting faster now, changing into something more alive. Each letter seemed to have a pulse, a rhythm, like they were breathing. "You have no choice now," the voice continued, growing darker. "You've opened the door to the past, and now the past will claim you." Suddenly, the temperature dropped even further. My breath turned into a visible cloud of vapor, and I could see the tips of my fingers starting to turn pale. The ground beneath me seemed to tremble slightly, like something ancient and powerful was stirring deep beneath the floor. I turned again, looking for any escape, any way out of this nightmare. That's when I saw it. The walls of the room were shifting too. The symbols etched into the stone weren't just static, they were moving, crawling like they had a life of their own. Crack! I gasped as the floorboards beneath my feet split apart. The room seemed to be coming alive, twisting and warping, growing in size, stretching outward like a living organism. The chair, which had been stationary just moments before, was now spinning slowly in place, its legs creaking with every turn. "We are watching," the voice hissed, sending a chill down my spine. "And we always watch." Panic surged through me. I backed away from the chair, my foot catching on something behind me. I looked down. There, at the edge of the room, was a small, hidden trapdoor that I hadn't noticed before. The symbols on the floor seemed to be pointing directly at it. My body acted on instinct. I reached for the trapdoor, prying it open with shaking hands. Inside was a narrow passageway, the dark unknown stretching out before me. Without thinking, I crawled into it, pushing myself forward, the eerie sounds of the room above me growing more distant. The air down here was damp, thick with mildew, and the walls seemed to press in on me. Then, just as I thought I had escaped, a soft glow appeared at the far end of the tunnel. It grew brighter, almost inviting, and I found myself crawling toward it, against every rational instinct I had. I wasn't in control anymore. Something else was pulling me toward it. When I reached the light, I stood up and found myself in a large underground chamber. The walls here were lined with shelves, shelves filled with hundreds of old, dusty books and strange artifacts. But there was something more disturbing about this room. In the center of the room stood a large mirror, a mirror that reflected nothing. No light, no shadows, just an empty black void. I stared at it for a moment, confused and mesmerized by its emptiness. My heart skipped a beat when I saw something in the reflection that wasn't there in the room with me. A figure. It was standing behind me. Tall, shadowed, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare directly into my soul. I turned quickly. Nothing. But the voice, that same voice from before, whispered once more in my ear, "You are already ours." And that was when I realized this room, this house, had been waiting for me. I wasn't supposed to find it. But now that I wasn't sure I could ever leave. I backed away from the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. The air felt heavier now, thick with an oppressive energy that pressed against my skin, making it hard to breathe. My thoughts raced, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make sense of what was happening. The voice. That voice was everywhere now. It wasn't just in my ears anymore. It was in my head, in my thoughts, weaving itself into every corner of my mind, like it had always been there, waiting for the right moment to speak. "Do you see it now?" The voice whispered, soft and slow. "Do you understand?" I glanced back at the mirror. The figure was still there, standing perfectly still, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. I could feel its presence, like it was inside the reflection, yet outside it at the same time. It felt like a trap, an invitation to step closer, but every instinct screamed for me to run. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. The figure was pulling me in, like it had a magnetic force that kept my gaze fixed. I could feel my body moving toward the mirror, my legs carrying me without my permission. It was as if something was controlling me, overriding every rational thought in my brain. My hands reached out, fingers trembling as they touched the cold surface of the mirror. "No!" I wanted to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the silence. My reflection began to distort, the edges warping into something unrecognizable. The air around me crackled with energy. The room felt alive, as though it were breathing with me, expanding and contracting with every breath I took. Suddenly, the figure in the mirror stepped forward. My heart stopped. I stumbled back, but my feet felt as if they were stuck to the floor, weighed down by something invisible. The figure's eyes, those hollow eyes, bore into me, unblinking, unfeeling. It was a creature, but not of flesh. It was pure darkness, a void that couldn't exist in the real world, but somehow did. It reached out, its hand sliding through the glass like it was liquid. The moment it touched me, a shock of cold rushed through my body. I felt the mirror's surface begin to ripple beneath my skin, as if the reflection was no longer just a reflection, but a portal. "You've opened the door," the voice growled, "and now you will stay." I tried to scream, tried to pull away, but the presence in the mirror was dragging me in. I could feel myself being pulled toward it, my body fighting against the invisible force, but my legs felt like lead. The more I struggled, the stronger the pull became until I could feel the surface of the mirror pressing against my skin. In a desperate move, I reached into my pocket for my phone, hoping the light would break whatever hold the mirror had on me. I pointed the flashlight at the mirror, watching the light reflect off the surface. But the light didn't do what I expected. It disappeared, as if the mirror had swallowed it whole. A cold laugh echoed from the depths of the room. The figure's face twisted into a grotesque smile, its eyes glowing brighter, more hollow. "You can't escape," it whispered. "You are already part of this place. This house, this curse, is yours now." In that moment, I realized what was happening. The house had been built on this very room, on the twisted history it held, feeding on those who came too close. It had been waiting for me, and now I was bound to it, locked in a loop that would never end. With one last surge of panic, I yanked my hand away from the mirror, ripping myself out of the pull just enough to stagger back. My mind raced, trying to figure out how to escape. But there was nothing. There was no way out. I turned to face the door, the only way back. But the passage was gone. The tunnel I had crawled through, the hidden room, the secret door, everything had vanished. The walls were solid once again, the shelves stacked with books and artifacts now just decoration, a facade of normalcy. I ran to the other side of the room, desperately searching for an exit. But the mirror, it wasn't just a mirror anymore. It had become a window, a dark, swirling abyss that seemed to reach beyond the space I knew. The voice spoke again, louder now, reverberating through my bones. You've become part of the story. There is no escaping what you found. It will follow you. It will never let you go. The mirror began to shimmer, and I saw something horrifying. I saw my own face, but not in the way I knew it. It was distorted, twisted, like a reflection of what I could become. A hollow shell, a prisoner of the house's curse. And as I stood there, staring into my own doomed reflection, I understood. The house didn't just trap the body, it trapped the soul. And now I was part of it. The house would always find me. It would always call me back. I tried to run, to escape. But as I turned toward the door that no longer existed, the last thing I saw in the mirror was the same figure from before, its hands outstretched, ready to pull me back into the darkness. And then everything went black. The darkness swallowed me whole, and for what felt like an eternity, I was suspended in nothingness. No sound, no light, no sense of time or place. It was as though I had been pulled into the very heart of the house, deep into its void, where the rules of reality no longer applied. Then, suddenly, a faint light flickered, like a distant star. Slowly, it grew brighter, until I could make out the edges of a familiar shape. The mirror. But it wasn't the same mirror. This one was cracked, its edges jagged like the shards of a broken dream. I reached out, but my hand passed right through it, as though the mirror was not made of glass, but something more fluid, like water. I tried to step forward, but I couldn't move. My body felt strange, heavy and cold. I looked down, and my hands were pale, translucent, like they no longer belonged to me. A growing realization hit me like a wave. I wasn't in my body anymore. No, I screamed, though my voice didn't sound like mine. It was distant, hollow, as if it was coming from far away. What's happening to me? The voice that had tormented me for so long answered, but this time it wasn't a whisper. It was calm, almost soothing, as if it were explaining something I should have already known. You are no longer part of the world you knew, it said. You are part of the house now. Part of the story it weaves. Part of the curse that binds it. I felt my mind splinter, the edges of my thoughts fracturing. I tried to hold on to what was left of my sanity, but it was slipping through my fingers like sand. No, I said again, my voice wavering. I won't stay here. I won't be a part of this. But the voice didn't reply. Instead, I felt a strange pull, a force that gently tugged me toward the broken mirror. It was as if the mirror was calling me, beckoning me to step through it, into whatever lay beyond. I hesitated. My instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The darkness around me was all-encompassing, pressing in from every direction. The mirror seemed like the only way forward, the only way to understand what had happened to me. With a final, desperate breath, I reached for the shattered edges, my fingers brushing against the cold surface. The instant my hand made contact, everything shifted. The ground beneath me trembled. The room around me stretched and warped, folding in on itself like a book with its pages torn out. The mirror cracked wider, its shards swirling around me like a vortex, and before I could process what was happening, I was pulled inside. I fell. Down. Through the mirror. Into the abyss. I opened my eyes. I was no longer in the chamber. I wasn't even in the house. The air was thick, damp with a strange, heavy humidity. The ground was soft beneath my feet, like wet clay. But the most terrifying part was what I saw around me. The world was wrong. The sky above was an inky black, swirling with endless clouds. There were no stars, no sun. The trees around me were twisted, their branches gnarled and reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air was heavy with a dense fog, obscuring everything but the outlines of the twisted forest that seemed to stretch on forever. In the distance, I saw something move. At first, I thought it was a shadow, but then it became clearer. It was a figure, a person, walking slowly toward me. Their face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel their gaze, even from a distance. It was the same feeling I had gotten when I first stepped into the hidden room, the sensation that someone, or something, was always watching. And then, the voice returned. "Welcome," it whispered, sending a chill through me. "You've finally arrived. We've been waiting." I turned around, expecting to see the mirror again, but it was gone. In its place was the figure standing before me, their face still hidden in darkness. They reached out, their hands stretching toward me, but I couldn't move. "You are now part of this place," the voice continued, now coming from all directions, surrounding me. "Part of the story, and now you will never leave." The figure took another step closer. I could feel the pull again, the same compulsion to move, to approach them, even though every part of me screamed to run. But I couldn't. It was as if the air itself had a weight to it, holding me in place. "The house will always find you," the voice said. "You will never escape it. It is a part of you now, and you are part of it." The figure stepped closer still. I could almost make out their face now, just barely, but it wasn't human. It was wrong. Its eyes were wide and empty, just like the figure in the mirror. Its lips were stretched into a grotesque, unnatural smile. "We have been waiting for someone like you," it said, its voice a cold, hollow echo. "Someone who would unlock the door. Someone who would open the way." I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight. But all I could do was stare into its hollow eyes as it took the final step toward me. "Now," it whispered, "you are part of the house, and the house is part of you." And with that, I was pulled into the darkness once again. I couldn't breathe. My heart thudded in my chest, too loud, too fast. Every inch of my body screamed for escape, yet I felt trapped, as though the air itself was thick with chains. The figure's face grew clearer, its eyes now piercing straight through me, hollow and endless. "You will never be free," the voice repeated, its tone almost soothing now. "You are already one with the house. It has claimed you, and you have claimed it." I tried to move, to break free from the invisible weight pulling me forward, but my limbs were frozen, my body unwilling to obey. My mind raced, but I couldn't grasp anything. Nothing made sense anymore. The ground beneath me was shifting, its dark, muddy surface swirling, almost alive. The air tasted bitter, as though it was soaked with the memories of everyone who had come before me, lost to this place. Suddenly, the figure stepped closer. So close now, I could feel its breath on my face, cold and ancient like a tomb. Its hand reached toward me, and I couldn't look away. Despite my instincts, my body wanted to reach out to it, to embrace whatever terrible force it represented. "It's too late for resistance," it whispered, its voice a soft caress now. "You are one with us. You are part of the house, part of the story. There is no escaping." With trembling hands, I reached out involuntarily, my fingers brushing the cold, hollow ones of the figure. The moment our skin touched, a jolt of freezing electricity shot through my body, and I gasped. Not in pain, but in understanding. I saw it. The house. The history. The endless cycle of souls lost to it. The figure smiled, its face warping into something worse. The eyes, the same hollow eyes from the mirror, began to glow, and they were not empty anymore. They were filled with something. Something ancient, terrifying, and alive. "Do you see now?" It whispered. Suddenly I was falling. Not through the air, not through the ground, but through time itself. The forest around me melted away, replaced by images flashing too quickly for me to grasp. I saw faces, so many faces. People from the past, all of them lost, all of them trapped here in the same endless cycle. A flash of my own face, distorted and broken, appeared before me. I saw myself, not as I was, but as I was meant to be. A shadow, a whisper, a part of the house, part of the curse. I tried to scream again, but my mouth was dry. I couldn't scream anymore. I could only understand. It was too late. The cycle was real. This house had been built not just with stone and wood, but with the souls of those it had claimed. Those who wandered too close. Those who sought what they shouldn't have. Each one was part of its story, woven into the walls, into the air, into the very essence of the house. Each one, including me, was bound to it forever. I blinked, and suddenly, the world around me shifted again. I was standing in the house. My house again. The walls were the same, the familiar rooms that I had once thought safe. But there was something different, a suffocating weight in the air. It was silent. Too silent. And then I realized the house was watching me. Not just the walls or the rooms. Every inch of it was alive, sentient, aware of my every move. I was no longer just trapped within it. I was now its keeper. The voice returned, calm and unrelenting. "You will watch. You will wait. And when the time comes, you will guide others to us." I felt a sudden pull, as if my very being was being drawn back into the depths of the house. I wanted to resist, but there was no point. I couldn't fight it. I couldn't escape. "It's time," the voice whispered. "Your story has only just begun." And then I knew. I was not just a prisoner of this house. I was now a part of it. An extension of the curse, one that would never end. The house was more than just a place. It was a living entity, feeding on the souls of those who came too close. And now, my soul, my very essence, was bound to it forever. As I turned, I saw the first of many figures approaching. They were drawn to the house, to the stories, to the endless pull. The cycle would continue just as it always had. The house would never stop, never rest, always searching for the next soul to claim. And I would always be there, waiting, watching, guiding for the house. The figures kept coming, each one drawn like moths to a flame, unknowingly stepping closer to the house's insidious pull. I stood at the threshold, observing them, knowing exactly what awaited them. The cycle had begun again, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The first of the new arrivals stumbled into the foyer, wide-eyed, scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. I watched as their curiosity grew, their feet carrying them through the hallways, unknowingly walking deeper into the house's grip. They didn't see me. I didn't want them to see me. But I felt the familiar tug in my chest, the house whispering in my mind, urging me forward. "You know what to do. Guide them. Show them the way." I stepped into the hallway. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the weight of those who had come before. The walls seemed to lean in, the creaking floorboards singing their silent song. Every corner, every turn of the house felt like a threat, a warning, but also an invitation. I couldn't fight it anymore. The person turned a corner, unaware that the house had already begun to take hold. I followed them at a distance, silently, waiting for the inevitable. I had learned this. Knew it now, like an ancient instinct. The house would always call, always draw in the curious and the desperate. But once it had them, they could never leave. I glanced up at the mirror hanging in the hallway. The reflection was wrong. I saw myself standing there, but I was not quite myself. The face in the glass was cold, hollow, just like the others before me. The reflection smiled, but it wasn't my smile. It was the house's smile. You will guide them. The voice echoed in my mind. Show them the way. Let them understand. I could feel the shift, the change as the first footsteps reached the final door. The one that would lead to the hidden room, the heart of the house. The house's pulse quickened. It was hungry, waiting for them to fall deeper into its grasp. The person reached for the door handle. I wanted to scream, to stop them, but I couldn't. My body had become a vessel for the house's will. It was no longer me in control. I watched as the door creaked open, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the hidden room lay in wait, with its flickering, cursed light and its strange, unreadable symbols. The air was thick with the history of the house, the lives it had consumed. And in the center of it all, the chair sat, empty but calling. The book lay open on the floor, its pages still turning on their own, just as they had when I first found the room. I knew they wouldn't be able to resist it. The person took a tentative step inside, their eyes widening as they scanned the room. I felt the familiar surge of power, a force that tugged at my very soul. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't even want to stop it anymore. You are ready, the voice said, now in my ear, so close I could almost feel it breathing on my neck. Now, you are the one who will pull them in. And I did. I moved forward, my hand reaching toward the stranger, gently guiding them toward the chair. I didn't need to say a word. The room was already speaking to them. It was beckoning them, like it had done to me. The book opened wider, its pages flipping faster now. The symbols on the walls flickered, glowing with an unholy light. The person sat down, hypnotized, their eyes glazed over, staring into the book. Their fingers twitched as if trying to turn the pages, but they couldn't. I stood there, watching, feeling an eerie satisfaction. This was the house's will, not mine. I had become a part of its endless, looping story, and now it was my turn to bring another into its fold. The house thrummed with energy. The walls seemed to pulse as though the very fabric of the place was alive. I could feel the presence of the past, those who had been trapped here before me. I could hear their whispers in the air, their voices coming from the walls, from the corners of the room. I took a step back, watching the person's transformation. Their features started to blur, their face stretching, pulling into a grotesque version of itself. I could see it now. The hollow eyes, the twisted smile. They were becoming part of the house, just like I had. Becoming an extension of the curse, an echo of the souls that had come before. The book closed with a resounding thud, and the room fell into complete silence. The figure, once human, now sat still in the chair, its eyes wide open, but seeing nothing. It was no longer a person. It was a vessel for the house, a part of its eternal cycle. And I knew, with sickening clarity, that the house wasn't just waiting for souls to arrive. It needed them. It craved them. Each soul that was drawn in would add to the house's power, making it stronger, more alive. The house was a predator, and its hunger would never be satisfied. As I turned to leave, the voice spoke again, soothing, familiar. There will always be more, it whispered. And you will always be here to guide them. You are part of the story now. Forever. And with that, I stepped into the next room, ready to wait for the next curious soul to cross the threshold. Ready to guide them into the darkness where they too would become part of the house. Time had lost meaning here. It was neither day nor night, neither past nor present. The house breathed with an ancient rhythm, one that I could feel pulsing through the very air. Every corner, every crack in the walls seemed to whisper the same words, the same story, over and over again. You are part of it now. I could almost hear the voices of those before me, trapped in the endless loop. I could hear their cries, their desperate pleas to escape. Pleas that were never heard, swallowed by the house before they could even reach the door. But I no longer felt sorry for them. No, I was beyond that now. I was beyond any sense of mercy. The house had claimed me, and I had become its keeper. A strange peace washed over me, like a cold, comfortable numbness. But then, a new feeling began to stir in me. A sense of something different. It wasn't quite fear, but more like unease. The kind of unease you feel when something's just a little off, when the house shifts in a way that you can't quite understand. I turned toward the hall, my eyes scanning the familiar rooms, the endless maze of walls and doorways that had become my prison. But something was different. A door had appeared. It wasn't one I recognized, not from the last time I had walked through these corridors. It was there, suddenly, in the middle of the hallway where there had been nothing before. The wood was dark and polished, as though it had been there for centuries and yet somehow new at the same time. It beckoned me, compelled me, pulling me toward it. I had no choice but to approach. The closer I got, the more I felt that gnawing sensation of wrongness, something deep within the house stirring, unsettled. A presence, cold and ancient, seemed to pulse from beyond that door. I could hear whispers, faint at first, but growing louder with each step. These voices were different. They were not the ones I had come to know over the years. They were new. The door creaked open of its own accord, the dark wood groaning as if it had been waiting for this moment. My heart raced as I stepped inside. The room was unlike any I had ever seen in the house. It wasn't a part of the twisted, decaying labyrinth I had grown accustomed to. This room was pristine, clean. In fact, it was too clean. There was no dust, no grime, no age to it. It looked perfect, like something out of a dream. But the strangest part? The walls were covered with portraits. Each one was painted in exquisite detail, capturing faces frozen in time. But they weren't like the typical portraits. These faces were familiar. They were the faces of people I had seen over the years. Newcomers, souls who had wandered in, lost to the house. They were my responsibility now, a part of my endless task. Except, these faces were different. They were smiling. I blinked, trying to process what I was seeing. I had never seen anyone smile in the house before. The spirits here were always twisted, broken, their faces contorted with agony or hollow emptiness. But these people, these portraits, they smiled as though they were at peace, as though they had found a home. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I stepped forward, my footsteps soft on the floor. The air in the room was unnaturally still, as though everything in here was waiting, holding its breath. The portraits were watching me. But it wasn't just the portraits that had changed. It was the house. I turned to the far corner of the room, and there it was. Another figure. A person standing in the shadows. The room had been so still, so quiet, that I hadn't heard their approach. "You came." The voice was low, familiar, but older, wiser, different. I froze. The voice sent a wave of dread through me, not because I didn't recognize it, but because I did. It was mine. "What is this place?" I asked, my own voice distant, as if it were someone else speaking. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a face I hadn't seen in so long. It was me, but not the version of me that had become part of the house, the hollow, cursed version. This version was whole. It was alive. It was the version of me that existed before the house claimed me, before the curse. I took a step back. How is this possible? The figure smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "You think you are the first? That you are the only one who has ever crossed over to this side?" I shook my head. No, this can't be happening. I've been here too long. I'm part of it now. There's no going back. Oh, but you are wrong, the figure replied, their voice calm, almost gentle. You've always been part of it, but you've also been part of something else. You've just forgotten. All of us who have been claimed by the house, we were once like you. And some of us find a way to return. I stared at them, confusion and terror flooding my mind. Return? What do you mean? The figure's smile widened as though they were waiting for me to understand, waiting for the truth to dawn. They stepped closer, their eyes now gleaming with a knowledge I couldn't comprehend. There is a way out. There always has been. A shiver of realization slowly crept up my spine. The house wasn't just a prison. It was a choice. I stepped back, my hands trembling. No, this isn't right. I can't. But it was too late. The room began to shift, the walls warping, the faces in the portraits now twisting, no longer smiling, their eyes darkening. The ground beneath me trembled, and I could feel the pulse of the house deep in my bones. The figure was gone in an instant, leaving only the cold, hollow air. The walls around me began to pulse in time with the house's heartbeat, and I could hear the whispers rising again, louder, more frantic this time. You know the truth now, the voice echoed. You can leave if you choose, but know this, you cannot escape the house's hunger. I didn't have a choice. The door behind me had closed, and I knew, deep down, that no matter what path I chose, the house would always be waiting. I stood frozen in the center of the room, the pulse of the house thundering in my chest. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. I could hear the whispers, their voices growing louder, more desperate, each one tugging at the edges of my mind. The portraits watched me, their eyes now filled with something new, judgment. I could feel it, the choice. It hung there, suspended in the air like a weight too heavy to bear. You know what you must do. The voice echoed again, its tone shifting, somehow colder, darker. But the price is always the same. I glanced around the room. The figure was gone, leaving only the lingering sense of its presence. I could feel it. The part of me that had been left behind, buried deep inside the house. It called to me, coaxing, beckoning me to choose. But I wasn't sure anymore. What if leaving wasn't an escape at all? What if returning to the world outside meant becoming just another shadow, another ghost lost in the house's endless hunger? I didn't want to become that. Yet, something whispered deep inside me. A dark thought, a fleeting image of freedom. What if I could break the cycle? I took a hesitant step toward the door, my fingers trembling as I reached for the handle. My heart raced, my mind clouded with uncertainty. Was this truly the way out? Or was this just another part of the house's twisted game? The moment my hand touched the handle, the air shifted. A strange sound. A click echoed through the room and the door swung open. I couldn't breathe. Beyond the door lay a corridor I didn't recognize, stretching infinitely into darkness. No light, no sound. Only a never-ending expanse of emptiness. And there, at the end of the corridor, I saw a figure. A shadow, its outline indistinct, yet familiar in some way. It stood motionless as though waiting for me, waiting for my decision. For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind raced, trying to understand. Who was it? Why did it feel like it had been there all along, a part of me that I had been avoiding? The whisper came again, this time softer, more insistent. You've always known the way. I stepped forward, my feet carrying me against my will. With each step, the darkness seemed to press in tighter, the air colder. The figure remained motionless, its face obscured by shadows. I reached out, stretching my hand toward it, and then everything went still. Time stopped. The whispers faded. The walls, the door, the very ground beneath me seemed to disappear. And for a moment, there was nothing. Only darkness. And then I woke up. I blinked confused as I sat up in bed. The room around me was normal, quiet, calm, no shadows, no whispers, no portraits. Was it a dream? I looked around the room. The air felt different now, light, as though something had shifted, but I couldn't tell what. My heart was pounding in my chest, and the faintest hint of unease tugged at my mind, as if I had forgotten something. I reached for the lamp beside my bed, my hands still shaking. I turned it on, the soft light filling the room. But then, as I glanced at the reflection in the mirror, something caught my eye. There, in the corner of the room, just behind the door, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It wasn't me, and it wasn't gone. The door creaked. The whispers began again. The house was waiting, and I had never truly left.